There was a boy, a certain strange, enchanted boy. They said he traveled very far, very far, over land and sea. A little shy and set of eyes, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he came my way. And as we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me: the greatest joy you will ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. There was a boy, a certain strange enchanted boy. He said he traveled very far, over land and sea. A little shy and sad of eyes, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he came my way. And then we spoke of many things, fools and kings. This he said to me: the greatest joy you will ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. So I'm ba 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 ba, so I'm ba da 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 da.
Welcome to Texas Southern University's Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research Community Engagement Core 2021 Clinical Research and Engagement Conference. Texas Southern University's Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research is funded by the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities Research Centers for Minority Institutions program. The Community Engagement Core thanks the National Institute of Health, Texas Southern University's leadership, and the College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences for their support. The purpose of the Community Engagement Core is to engage the greater Houston community in efforts to increase clinical trials awareness and reduce health disparities in ethnic minority communities. The Community Engagement Core has three specific aims. Specific Aim 1, to identify and address health concerns in the greater Houston community. Specific Aim 2, to increase research participation. Specific Aim 3, to disseminate research findings. This is all achieved through community partnerships with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and healthcare systems. Introducing the CBMHR Community Engagement Core Team, led by Dr. Veronica Ajawali, Director, Dr. Grace Loud, Associate Director, Dr. Uche Ndefo, Associate Director, Ms. Jazia Angel, Project Coordinator, Dr. Tonisha Taylor, Social Media Lead, Ms. Sierra Liggins, Social Media Graduate Assistant, Dr. Morgan Kirby, Mass Media Lead, Dr. Maria Mejia, Healthcare Systems Liaison, Ms. Lena Bean, Outreach Coordinator, Dr. Asada Richards, Community-Based Participatory Research Consultant, and Dr. Rosalia Guerrero, Community Training Consultant. Thank you to the CEC team for your dedication to the Community Engagement Core. Now introducing Director, Dr. Veronica Ajawali.
Thank you and good morning to everyone, to all our amazing audience and guests. Thank you so much for taking time out of this beautiful Saturday morning to join us in today's conference. We also want to say a big thank you to all our panelists and all our speakers for today. Thank you for making time out to, devote yourself to prepare for this amazing conference. And of course, to the leadership of this grant, Dr. Olalei, Dr. J, and Dr. Liang, who are the PIs of the NIH-funded Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research here at Texas Southern University, as well as to the leadership and administration of TSU and the COPHS College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. Thank you very much, and we are grateful that you all have, taken time out to join us and to spend a couple of hours to discuss a very important topic addressing clinical research, clinical trials, and seeing how we can continue to engage with each and every one of you in the community to move the needle in the right direction to address health disparities. Over the next 3 hours, we do have a lot of exciting and engaging events. I will just go over the agenda real quickly. So in a few minutes, we'll be bringing up some of our guest speakers, and then we would have a performance break. That is going to be a skit that is being provided by Biological College of Medicine, as well as one of our clinical trials on diabetes, the Radiant study. We will feature that as well. After that, we would have a next set of guest speakers, talking about why we should participate in clinical trials, talking about COVID-19 trials, as well as issues with children in clinical trials. After that session, there will be another performance break, and then that will lead us into the panel discussion. We are really excited to have a broad multidisciplinary team of panelists that will be discussing clinical trials, clinical research from diverse perception. We have clinicians representing a clinical research investigator. We have a clinical research coordinator, research pharmacist, research program manager, as well as someone that has actually participated in clinical research. So thank you to the audience that have already submitted their questions. We've made these questions available to the panelists, and please feel free to, turn in your questions as we go, either for the panelists or for our guest speakers. We will do the best we can to address these questions as we proceed with today's event. At the end of today, we would also be posting these questions and answers. Will be available on all our social media platforms as well as on our website, just so you can always go back and make reference to that information if needed. After the panel session, we would have another short performance break where we would have another skit that will be done in Spanish. I love the Spanish language, and I think I'm going to have to go learn how to speak Spanish, after just listening to this skit. But that skit is going to be done in Spanish, translated in English, and then we would have a poetry performance that will be heard as well. And then after that, we will take you to a short overview of our website. We are a newly funded core. TSG has been privileged to have this grant for the past few years, but this is the first time that the Community Engagement Core is being established. So we have a lot of exciting and rich information to share. So we will go over that briefly with you, our community members, and also share our website with you. And after that, this will then take us to the end where we will, be able to appreciate you and say, see you later, not bye, but, we'll have a lot of other events coming up in the future. Next slide, please. All right, so as we proceed on, please turn in whatever questions you might have into the Q&A session. We will be answering those questions as we go. We also have a survey at the end of today's conference. Again, we are very community driven. We are community oriented. We want to hear your feedback. So please share your feedback with us on what you would like to see in our next conference, on what topics you want us to address in our next seminars, what type of speakers would you want us to bring, because we are totally responsive to the needs of the community. We are also streaming live on Facebook, so please join us, CEC Texas Southern U. That is our Facebook handle, so find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and also on YouTube. So we are present everywhere, as all social media platforms, we are there. Please join us, share with your family and friends, because again, the next 3 hours, we trust that it's going to be really impactful. It's going to be informative and engaging. So please share that information around. We're also live tweeting. You'll see us on hashtag CBMHR and hashtag CRC2021. Please stay connected with us. We want you to continue to engage with us as you have joined us this morning. We value your time and your input. So please, social media, on all our social media handles, as well as subscribing to our mailing and text message platform. If you want to do that, please pick up your phone and text TSUCEC to 855-264-9031. That information is also going to be posted in the chat box, so feel free to do that and stay engaged with us. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let us go ahead and get started with the details of today's event. It is my ultimate pleasure to bring forward our very first speaker, our very first guest speaker in today's Clinical Research and Engagement Conference. This is Professor Shodake, and he will be talking to us about ethics and clinical trials. Dr. Shodake is a professor of bioethics in the College of Arts and Sciences at Tuskegee University. He is the resident bioethicist at the Center for Biomedical Research and served as Associate and Interim Director of the National Center for Bioethics in Research and Healthcare, and as the Special Government Expert on DHHS Secretary Advisory Committee for Human Research and Protection. Dr. Shodake shares the IRB and responds to research ethics consultations using literature and art as narrative imagination for discussion of ethical questions. He researches community bioethics, health and human rights, health disparities, genomic ethics, neuroethics, and plight of vulnerable population. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I know we cannot hear you, but I believe we all have a round of applause right now. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shodake. Dr. Shodake, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajawali. Let me see if I can share my screen now. Can you hear me all very well?
Yes, sir, we can. We can hear you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Congratulations to you and the planning group for this important occasion. Let's see. I am aware of the packed agenda, so I'll move expeditiously to do what we can to stay within the time limit. I put this slide here to you to acknowledge the people on whose shoulder I stand at Tuskegee University, as they are. I am because they are, and because they are, therefore I am. I will just say their names for as a matter of record. Dr. Sharat Morris, President, Dr. Aglan, Provost, Dr. Prakash, Dean, and Dr. Yates, my Director, Ms. Lee, Program Manager, Ms. Bernard Fraser, and Dr. Lucinia Dunn, who are within the community that we work with. I put this here just to let you know, as a disclaimer, that my work at Tuskegee is supported by a number of sources, but anything I say here solely my impression and perspective of what's going on, and they do not represent the official views of Tuskegee University or any of those entities listed. This is a very busy slide, and I put this there because, as you well know, people of color are underrepresented in medical research and in clinical trials. But in order to take advantage of scientific advancement that promote health equity, we do need to participate in clinical trials. That means a transformation needs to occur. But before a transformation can occur, we need to be able to open our eyes to another's experience. We must look back in order to look forward. So these are many of the key moments of medical infamy, egregious acts, if you will, that have been done. I have chosen not to present them for paradigmatic cases. We will only have time to present one of them.
Dr. Shodake, sorry
yes.
to interrupt. Can you please make your presentation presentation view so we can see the entire thing?
Okay, let's see.
Actually, Dr. Shodake, it looks like you're using multiple screens, so you need to actually make sure that you're sharing the correct screen, the presenter screen. That's it. You got it.
I got it now?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right. Thank you very much for calling my attention to that. One of the paradigmatic cases that I chose, you may be aware of him, Mr. Vatrus, well-born Hardiman. Again, time will not allow to go into the story. In fact, I want to spend about 3 minutes for you to experience it with me, and of course, ask you what is particularly troubling to you about this case, and I've done enough to prepare ahead of time for what we need to do. So So let me just share this screen and tell me whether you see it. Can you see it? Hello?
Yes, we can, Dr. Shodake. We
Okay,
can.
great.
Thank you.
Make a joyful noise unto the Lord.
It's not really my story, it's our story, because I could not have had it done without
Can you hear it?
Yes, we can. If you can maybe make it full screen, yes, right there.
I met Vertus in the church
Perfect.
choir.
There you go.
He really couldn't carry a tune very well. In fact, sometimes I would look to him and I would sing directly in his ear, and that way that would get him back on pitch.
What was so compelling for me was that here was a man who had never written a book or made a film before, who, because of the love of his friend, became a storyteller, became a filmmaker.
Any memories come to mind?
Oh, very fond of memories. Maybe on a Saturday afternoon, if you find somebody had an old broken down wagon, you take the hook on it, the iron hook that you know, but make a wire and curve it and then roll that hook down the hill or whatever, and that's it. That's the only thing we have.
Roll the hook.
With that wire. That's our toy. It's a black man that founded Rouse Station.
This is amazing about Rouse Station. The black community played such an integral part in that whole process of freeing slavery.
Oh yeah. They called this little community Freedom Village.
We never thought much of segregation. That was normal when we came up, because that's all we knew.
I knew that something was wrong on this particular day. All of a sudden, he began to sob. He was sobbing uncontrollably. And he said to me as a child, 5 years old, I was experimented on. I was experimented on with radiation.
They had a little round beanie they put on our heads, and then two girls stood behind a lead screen, and they pushed a button, and it seemed like I saw some flashes. And she told the other nurse, "Oh my God, I've given him too much."
Make a joyful noise unto the Lord.
I think any sort of description of what has occurred and what Vertus lives with on a daily basis is nothing short of incredible.
Are you angry?
No. Because if you're angry, that means your heart's not right.
Hallelujah, 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 singing.
It was God's grace that helped me. It kept me here. I think he wanted this to go. I think he wanted to go. To show the magnitude of his mercy. Because it should be told.
Okay. Perhaps let me make sure that I choose the right one this time.
Yes, and it looks perfect. Thank you.
Okay, looks perfect. Okay, very good. I am.
Make a joyful.
Make it flipped.
It's all good.
Just hold on.
Maybe you need to pause the video, that
Yes.
video slide, maybe close the browser or pause it.
Sorry about this.
It's not really my story, it's our story. Because I could not have had it done without you.
Dr. Shodake, do you want me to share what you said?
I think, yeah.
Okay, all right, let's try that.
Let's try that.
Yes.
See if that.
Okay.
Okay.
Just tell me when to advance and I will.
All right. Okay. Very well. So sorry about that technical problem. I would have asked you this time, what's particularly troubling to you about this case. But in the interest of time, I will let you ponder that. Next slide, please. Well, upon my reflection, these are a set of things that I listed, and you may look at that when you are able to at your own time. These are issues that could influence the engagement and recruitment of research participants. Next slide. Here is one troubling one again that you may have heard about, the syphilis study at Tuskegee. There is a link there for you to actually listen to the voices of study participants as well. And next slide, please. When you've done that, look at it and see if your own reflection about things that trouble you matches these set of issues that have been raised. Next slide, please. Here is another one that you may or may not be familiar with, the Henrietta Lacks case. Again, you can Google it, but the short form of the story is on the slide there for you. And I would have asked you if you had time, what is particularly troubling to you. Next slide. So here is my own summation of the reflection regarding that. Next slide, please. And you may be aware of the Havasupai Indians versus Arizona State University case. I put all of these there so that you might become sensitized for ethical reflection if we had the time. Next slide. Here is a summation of my own reflection on this, and you will understand in a minute why I had to do all this to prepare us. Next slide. So we learned a lot of lessons from all of those particular lived experiences, all the way from 18 something to 1949 at Nuremberg, and all the way, keep clicking until we exhaust the content of the slide. A number of checks and balances are in place now. You can see it. The 45 CFR 46 Code of Federal Regulations, privacy issues have been taken care of. Certificate of confidentiality has been taken care of. Click on again. We have put in place a third party known as Institutional Review Board that provides oversight to all of these research projects that may involve human subjects. Next slide.
Dr. Shodake, you have 2 minutes
Yes.
remaining.
Great. Great. I'm almost done. All right. Very well. So right on time. What are the take-home lessons here? And what makes clinical trials as research ethical? Well, the value, right? The value, we must consider the value. Enhancement of knowledge from research is important. Scientific validity is important. You can't just do any research project. You must think about, is it even worth doing at all? Fair selection of subjects and distribution of benefits and burdens. This is part of the reason why this sort of thing is going on. Favorable risk-benefit ratio, reasonable compensation or incentive, independent review, as I've alluded to, and informed consent is extremely important because it derives from respect for persons that will be enrolled in research. All right. I put this there so that you might be reminded that we all have our part to do, and I know that we can do this together. Each one of us is like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle when identifying and resolving bioethical issues concerning clinical research and clinical trials for the benefit of us all, for the common good. We are dependent on one another for our health and wellness. And I do hope that you can hear me now. Sorry I had to speed through all these and for the technical challenges that we had as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shodake. That was really inspiring. Thank you for sharing, some of the background information going into the history. And the exciting thing, obviously, like you've mentioned, is that now we are taking the right step in the right direction with IRB, informed consent, and making sure that clinical research is being conducted in an ethical manner. I'm aware that for the audience, sorry, because of the time crunch, we will not be able to take live questions for Dr. Shodake at this time, but please feel free to still post your questions to us. We will make time later on to reach out to Dr. Shodake, and those answers will be posted on our website and on our social media handles. If you also like to get a copy, of this presentation, reach out to us and we will be sharing that with you. All the videos that were played by Dr. Shodake today are also posted in the chat box. If you want to go back and review and re-listen to those videos, because those videos truly sensitize our emotions to be able to make decisions in the right direction. Just like the man that had the story said, is he angry? No, he's now making a decision to move things forward. And I think that's what we should continue to advocate for. Thank you so much, Dr. Shodake. We really appreciate having you with us this morning. And we will be reaching out with a lot of questions from our team and from the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I look forward.
Thank you. All right, this will take me on to the next speaker for this session. Okay, next slide, please. And next, okay. Our next guest speaker for this session is our very own Dr. Omanike Olalei. She is an amazing mentor. She is also the principal investigator for this grant. So she will be talking to us over preclinical trials and the first 4 phases of clinical trials. Dr. Olalei is a professor of pharmacology and the interim associate provost and associate vice president for research at Texas Southern University. She is the principal investigator of TSU's Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research, CBMHR, which the Community Engagement Core is under. And in addition to this, Dr. Olalei is TSU's Program Director for ASA-funded Maternal and Child Health Student Training Program for Academic Readiness and Success. She is also the Co-Director of Education Training and Community Outreach of the Gulf Coast Consortia Center for Comprehensive Pharmacokinetics, Pharmacodynamics, and Formulation. She has extensive expertise in drug discovery and development, research spanning more than 20 years working in major pharmaceutical companies and academia. Without further ado, to our amazing audience, I know we're all, clapping, even though I cannot hear you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Olalei. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajawali, for that kind introduction. Thank you for you and your team for hosting this historic conference at Texas Southern University. We're really blessed to have you to host this. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists and speakers. I look forward to this conference. And I will go ahead and share my slides now. Thank you. Can you see my slides well?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you so much.
Sure. So today I'll be talking to you about preclinical drug development and the 4 phases of clinical trials. And it's been such a pleasure to do part of this work also at Texas Southern University. So my outline will be mainly focused on 2 major areas: preclinical drug development and the 4 phases. However, I'll give you some examples that we have here from Texas Southern University from some of our great team here. The road to drug development is such a long journey, but it can be very fruitful and satisfying, especially if we're able to take a single drug all the way from the basic science research into the clinic. So it starts with a great team of people, very multidisciplinary team of people that includes scientists, pharmacologists, pharmacists, medical doctors, nurses, and even the community coming together to talk about health concerns and looking at specific diseases that they're trying to address. And then we then come up with specific compounds or small molecules in the case of drug discovery, where we look how these compounds can target a specific disease. And to do this, we use what we call a high throughput screening robot, and we can screen thousands and sometimes millions of compounds during this process. And when we do that, we narrow down to a few compounds, and we take this through a rigorous process of what we call preclinical drug development in animal studies before we go all the way to humans. So it's a very long journey, and I'll walk you through this process today. First, when we get to phase 1, studies in healthy volunteers, then phase 2 in patients that have the disease that we're trying to address, and then phase 3, where we do a larger validation of efficacy and safety, and then all the way to FDA approval. And I just wanted to stop here to say, we've come a very long way. This story here is a penicillin story from the discovery of Sir Alexander Fleming and his colleagues. And they were awarded the Nobel Prize in 1945 for the identification of penicillin. This is what we call the miracle drugs, but interestingly, this was actually accidental discovery. So most of the stories I'll be telling you today will be more of a methodological way by which we discover drugs and walk all the way to clinical trials. And like Dr. Shodika said, making sure that these trials in human beings are done ethically. So just to show you here that the process involves a very large team, starting from even the governmental agencies that regulate and fund some of the trials, also the clinical trial sponsors, the drug companies, a lot of the large drug companies that are the clinical trial sponsors. And also we have the Food and Drug Administration of the US that would review and approve the drugs through that process. And also I just wanted to showcase here some of our labs here at Texas Southern University, where we do also do drug discovery and development. And of course, we have to have the clinical trial team. And this is, again, a large team involving not just the drug companies or the academic institutions, but also clinical research organizations. And all this process involves this team, funding, and people, and before going all the way to commercialization and marketing. And this is just to show you again that it takes a lot of people to do this. It's just not a one-man show, and we need a lot of expertise. And I just want to give you a brief overview of the timeline. It takes close to 20 years to go all the way from a discovery of a potential drug. In this case, I'm talking mostly about drugs, but it could be a procedure, it could be a device, it could be a test, all the way from discovery in the basic biomedical sciences to phase 4. So you have about 19 years for the drug companies. They look at their patent protection. It takes about 12 years to reach market, and they have about 7 years of exclusive marketing for profit. But I have to stop here and share this quote with you from Judge Merck, where it says, we have to remember, we can never forget that the medicine is for the people. It's not for profit. And if we do our job well, the rewards will come, but it is for the people. And so this brings, again, linking back to what Dr. Shodeke mentioned about conducting clinical trials in an ethical manner. So the scientists have to know this also from the beginning. It's not just something we address during clinical trials, it's things we do from preclinical trial phase of this. So in the drug discovery, we screen thousands of compounds, like I said, in some cases, millions of compounds, and we narrow down to about a few hundreds and a few by the time we get into clinical trials after the IND is submitted for first-in-human testing. And as you see shortly, we have 4 phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and they all have different purposes. And then you have the NDA that is submitted and all the way to the Food and Drug review and approval. So it's a very lengthy and costly process. Could take about 2.6 billion on the average to get a drug from the bench all the way to market. And then we have phase 4, where we do what we call post-marketing surveillance. This is a commitment to ensure that there's continued monitoring of safety in the population. And I just wanted to show this briefly. I won't spend time on it. It's just a research and development report from JAMA showing that it takes a lot to bring compounds from the bench to the market. And a lot of the drug companies have to invest a lot of money, but if it's fruitful, they do get rewarded out of it. So moving on now, the first phase is the preclinical drug discovery. And in this phase, we start, like I said, with several compounds, hundreds of compounds. And this is a very good example of some of the work that even we're doing in our infectious disease lab here at Texas Southern University. We're very proud. We have about 16 projects that are very active in our lab. We have several graduate students. Here is Collins, Manver, and Tolu in my lab. And we start all the way from identify a potential drug target. And in this case, for infectious diseases, we walk it all the way from the genomic level to the biochemical level, structural level. And the idea is to better understand this drug target. And when we better understand it, then we can screen compounds against it to identify what we call all the way a lead series compound that's promising, that could now go into animals and eventually into humans. So I just wanted to give you this big overview of what we have, the type of infrastructure we have here at TSU. This is one example of how we took one drug that was identified from inhibiting a specific target that's important for tuberculosis, the lung disease. And we've been able to take over 175,000 compounds, narrow down to 21, and eventually narrow down to about 5 compounds that we're looking at, not just for treatment of TB, but now also looking at for treatment of patients that have tuberculosis and HIV. So we've done a lot of this work. We continue to pursue it to be able to bring a compound to the market. Secondly, in the next phase of our preclinical drug development, this is where we now interrogate the compounds we have identified closely in animal models before we actually get into humans. So in this animal studies, we look at the dose response, the mechanism of action, which is how does the drug work in the body? How exactly is it working? The duration of effect, reversibility. We also look at potential for off target. So, we have hundreds and thousands of genes, and we know that drugs can have off target. So we interrogate and make sure to reduce toxicity to specifically know that our compounds are selectively toxic to the target versus any other target. So we also look at pharmacokinetics in different animal species before we go into humans. And we also look at the absorption, the distribution, the metabolism, the excretion of the drug. We also want to look at for potential for species-specific activity. Then we go ahead to look at the various toxicology studies. We do acute toxicity, immunotoxicity, carcinotoxicity, reproductive toxicity studies, all of this in animal. And then we have enough sufficient preclinical data to now start interrogating some more assays, which are the methods by which we test this before we go first in human. And I just wanted to show you on the right hand here, this is a big infrastructure we have here funded by the state of Texas at Texas Southern University's CBMHR grant. Is the Gulf Coast Center for Comprehensive PK, PD, and Formulation. The government gave TSU this money to help people that have identified anti-cancer agents to move their drug from the bench all the way to drug development phase. So we do have this robust infrastructure here at Texas Southern University. This is some of our labs. I'm just highlighting two of the labs here of my colleagues, Dr. Dong Liang and Dr. Wan Shea in the preclinical development lab. So we have a very good niche here. We're next to the largest medical center in the world, and it just turns out that at TSU we have this great expertise to be able to take compounds from the bench all the way to the clinic. And this is very key because now when we have this expertise in TSU, where we're one of the largest historically Black colleges in the country, and we serve Harris County, which is one of the third largest counties in the nation, we need to be vested and make sure that we have the healthcare workforce, the biomedical workforce that are actually looking at discovering this compound so that we're really vested in as we look at diseases that disproportionately impact minority populations. So this is a very strategic role that Texas Southern University is playing. So now we're moving to the phase of clinical trials, and you have to have what we call a clinical protocol. It's a detailed plan of the purpose of the study, and I'll because of time, I'm going to move quickly. Clinical trials, as you heard from Dr. Shodeke, are very highly regulated. And that's very important because now you're talking about testing these compounds in human beings. So we have the training requirements. The Office of Clinical Research at NIH provides clinical research training. Dr. Shodeke mentioned about informed consent, which is a process in which you educate the patient about the risk and benefits and alternatives for the proposed intervention, procedure, or drug. We also have the Internal Review Board, which ensures that this research is done ethically. So all of this have to be done before the research actually takes place. We have the case report form, we have the clinical trial materials, we have to report all the adverse events, and these are also monitored by several regulatory bodies, including the FDA. So for phase 1 study, it's the one we called saying that it's a lot of fun, a lot of college students participate in this. It's for healthy volunteers. And the goal of the phase 1 study is to evaluate the safety of this drug first in human, in healthy volunteers. So the duration can be a week to several months. We usually like to start with a single dose study. We also do a food effect study. We do the dose proportionality study, a mass balance study, several studies. And the idea here is to better understand this drug in terms of the safety. We want to evaluate the safety of this drug first in this phase 1 study. And about 70% of drugs from this phase, according to the FDA, move on to the next phase. And then in phase 2 studies, this is where we want to really ask the question, is this drug effective? What is the efficacy of this drug? We look at the dose efficacy relationship, the therapeutic dose regimen. We also look at the duration of therapy. We design different types of phase 2 studies. This is a study where we look at it first in the patients for the disease of study. And here there are different study design. Time will not permit me to go into the detail of the different study design. We have the randomized study design, open label versus blind. We also have, we can run parallel studies or crossover studies. And in the open label study, everyone knows what, medication they're taking, who's taking the medication.
Dr. Olalei, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, thank you. Then we have the single blind study where a patient doesn't know whether he or she's taking a test drug or placebo, and then we have the double blind. So at this time, about 33% of drugs that successfully go through this phase will move to the next phase, which is phase 3. So in the phase 3 studies, now we have victory insight. We're usually looking for victory insight. These are larger multi-center, multi-site studies where we're looking at the safety and efficacy of this drug now in a larger population at different hospitals. And this can take 1 to 4 years. And now it's, again, like I said, it's a very costly process. And we go all the way from preclinical again once to get to phase 3. And I mentioned earlier that it takes about $2.6 billion on the average per drug approval. So here now we have a larger population. And then in the phase 4 studies, we now, this, like I mentioned earlier, this is a commitment study by the company, the sponsor, to say, hey, we want to look at the post-marketing surveillance, pharmacovigilance surveillance. We want to look at pharmacoepidemiology of this drug now that's being monitored. And it's to ensure that the drug is safe and it's effective in a heterogeneous patient population. So here we look at several thousands of people, and it can take a year to or more. And this is just an example. Time will not permit me. You can go later to look at it. A situation, an unfortunate story that happened with Vioxx several years ago, where this information came out about the cardiovascular problems was seen heightened at the phase 4 post-marketing study. And this was a very big issue during that time. And I just wanted to highlight lastly that even here at Texas Southern University, we recently collaborated with our colleagues at Emory University on, we identified about 5 potential compounds targeting SARS-CoV-2, specifically looking at the prophylactic pathway, the entry pathway, and also potential treatment pathway. And we're working with the NIAID to look at funding a phase 2 study. So we're very excited about this. This is coming out of my lab and collaborating with my colleagues, Dr. Liang, Dr. J, Dr. Ajawali, to move this into phase 2 studies for some of the drugs that we're repurposing. So these are existing drugs, but repurposing for treatment of COVID-19. So thank you so much. We're so blessed for TSU to play this strategic role during this time in our nation. I would like to say a big thank you to NIH and IMHD for funding all our studies and also this initiative. A big thank you to Dr. Veronica Ajawali and her amazing community engagement team of faculty, consultants, staff, and students for hosting this inaugural clinical conference. Thank you very much again for inviting me to give this talk. Thank you.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Olalei. A very informative session, sharing a lot of details about the phases of clinical trials and how everything kind of starts from the benchtop all the way to human. And we are very grateful for that information. Thank you to the audience for staying engaged. We have a couple of questions, but in the interest of time, those questions will be replied to directly by our moderators. Again, please feel free to continue to send your questions our way, and we will be answering those questions either directly in the chat or, if time permits, live. But as of right now, we need to try and, keep up with time. But Dr. Olalei, we appreciate you, and thank you so much for that session. Next slide, please. Okay, right now we are going to take a short break where we would have the Baylor College of Medicine Office of Outreach and Health Disparities. This is an amazing group of professionals that are really intrigued and involved in moving the needle forward regarding addressing health disparities. And their group have been able to put together a skit addressing some of the hesitancies, some of the questions that most of the community members would have or actually have regarding clinical trials. So the Don L. Duncan Comprehensive Cancer Center at Baylor College of Medicine employs multi-pronged strategies to engage with community in the Houston area. Most of this work is done through the Office of Research and Health Disparities. Their innovative theater outreach program has been in existence for more than 12 years to promote cancer prevention among racial ethnic minorities. More recently, they created theater performances to complement cancer prevention and performances and address the areas of minority participation in clinical research. The theater outreach program performances are available on a dedicated playlist on the Baylor College of Medicine's YouTube channel, and the QR code is there. We would also post the link to their YouTube channel. So please feel free to, explore some of their videos and share that with your colleagues and friends. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Baylor College of Medicine team that have put together this wonderful skit titled Win-Win for Everyone. Thank you.
Darryl, you got to hear this. So this morning, when I was walking to my domino game at the center, I saw a funny looking flyer. At first, I thought it was for free stuff. Yeah, you know I'm a sucker for free stuff. But when I read it closer, it was for something called a clinical trial. It's some kind of exercise study that the college is doing. Exactly, because I've been trying to get back into exercising. My daughter Lauren stays on my case lately to take my health more seriously. She keeps telling me that she sees all these unhealthy people as a nurse at the hospital, and she doesn't want me to end up like them. She says not managing some important aspect of your health, like blood sugar, cholesterol, smoking, or being overweight, can lead to some scary stuff. I mean, you can get diabetes, heart disease, or cancer more easily if you don't take care of yourself. So, I've been trying to get back into shape. I was curious if this clinical trial was a good opportunity. I brought it up with Lauren when she called this afternoon. Apparently, there's a lot of these clinical trials that help make better treatments for people with various illnesses, or people who just want to improve their health like you and me. She was really excited about it and thinks it might help me get motivated. Now, I know I need to get serious about this, so I thought it might be fun if we both signed up. But that way we can do the program together. Well, that's what I asked Lauren. What would I really be signing myself up for? She explained it's pretty simple. During the study, they would pay for doctor visits and special training. She also says a good way to get testing done for free. I mean, they'll watch your blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, and it might even help you get healthier too. All we got to do is show up to our appointments and classes. Lauren said the doctor will explain everything we're going to do in the study before we start. And we can ask questions if we have any concerns. And even if we sign up today and end up not liking it, we can leave at any time. Now, I know what your suspicious self is thinking. Oh, these things are always controlled by the government. They just want to get our information. But Lauren told me that the college can only keep information about the trial. They can't share it with anybody. They don't use our real names or personal information. They can only use the information to show them if the trial is helping us get healthier. Now, I was surprised and not shocked that Jimmy Earl always takes part in flu vaccine trials. He said the researchers were nice and they never ever shared his information, and they always kept him informed about all his results. Now, Lauren also told me not many black folks join these trials. Well, she said black folks, a lot of them are scared to participate in clinical trials because they think the researchers are going to use us as guinea pigs. And that's not good. Well, because doctors need to know how things affect African Americans. But they need to know what works for us so they can provide us the proper care. Times have changed. Research today is not like the Tuskegee experiment. There are restrictions in place to protect participants, especially their privacy. They never ever shared Jimmy Earle's information. And Lauren told me they have people in place whose only job is to see that all rules are followed. And on top of all of that, we can have access to programs and medicines that may improve our lives before everyone else even hears about them. So, yeah, it sounds like a win-win for everyone. Well, so what do you say? You on board? Great, great. I'll give them a call and find out how to get signed up. I'll talk to you later, Daryl.
Awesome. That was an incredible Thank you so much to the Baylor College of Medicine outreach group led by Dr. Maria and our team. Thank you so very much. We really appreciate that, and we are very grateful that you've been able to share that information with us. Just a quick reminder before we proceed, we do have the opportunity for our audience to share their thoughts with us by a survey. So please go ahead and complete the survey. We really want to hear back from you. And of course, because of COVID, our conference is virtual. If we were in a physical location, we would have provided lunch to everybody because this is a 3-hour long event. So while you complete the survey, you also have the opportunity to complete information about picking up a gift card, an electronic gift card for lunch. So please complete the survey and also give us the information that we need so that we can send you an electronic gift card to a place of your choice based on the options that we have on there. And you will be able to enjoy a lunch with us this wonderful afternoon. We'll go ahead and proceed now to sharing a short information on diabetes clinical trial titled Radiant Study.
Do you or someone you know have diabetes? Has your diabetes been difficult to manage, even with treatment? We are discovering unusual types of diabetes with unknown causes that doesn't respond to typical treatment. Some of these types have a specific genetic cause. Others may be due to metabolic processes. We believe unusual diabetes may be more prevalent in the Black and Hispanic communities. Physicians sometimes don't know how to diagnose these unusual forms. The National Institutes of Health has started Rare and Atypical Diabetes Network, or RADIANT, to help find out more information about these unusual forms of diabetes. We are eager to recruit people who think they may have an unusual type of diabetes. If you qualify, you will get extensive genetic and metabolic evaluations to find the cause of your diabetes. We hope that finding the cause will lead to better treatment. All evaluations will be done in Houston at Baylor College of Medicine. All the testing and parking for the visits will be free of charge, and we'll be learning more about diabetes. If you think you or someone you know may qualify, please visit our website at www.atypicaldiabetesnetwork.org or call us at 713-798-5757.
Welcome to our first speaker session, Issues with Children in Clinical Research. Dr. Fashipe is an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics, section of Hematology Oncology at Baylor College of Medicine. Her goals are shaped by her desire to help children facing the hardships of a blood disorder, particularly those patients with sickle cell disease who continue to have significant comorbid complications and decreased lifespan. In addition to Dr. Fashipe's academic role, she is actively involved in various sickle cell-focused community efforts, including her appointment to the first Texas Sickle Cell Advisory Committee from 2016 to 2018, and her current role as chair of the Houston Sickle Cell Collaborative, a joint effort between the Houston Health Department and organizations vested in sickle cell disease. Dr. Fashipe, thank you for being here with us today. Turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation to present today. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Tocilizumab Fashipe, and I'm so excited to be here. Today, I'm going to focus on issues with children in clinical research. These are my disclosures, and I will say that it's not like I have stock or anything in these companies, but actually my role is to help industry stay accountable when we're doing clinical trials that are sponsored by drug companies. And so that's what a role for a physician to be a consultant. And I also have some grant funding. So let's do a mini review. We just heard an excellent presentation from Dr. Olalei about the phases of clinical research. And she excellently walked us through all the various components of that. So I'm not going to belabor that point. And then prior to that, we heard another wonderful presentation, an eye-opening one from Dr. Shoreke. I learned so much, and I thought I knew a lot about ethics in clinical research, but I still learned something today. And many of the words he discussed are kind of in this little graphic. The one I want to focus on today is the one in the middle, vulnerable subjects. And in this case, we're going to focus on children. So why are children vulnerable? Well, they're not at the legal age to give consent for research. And I believe Dr. Rouse, our next speaker, is going to kind of go into what that looks like in detail for everybody. But for children, you know, not being of legal age, and I put a star because for Texas, legal age is 18 years old, but there are certain states that have a different age, and certain countries might have a different age as well. So we need to protect the vulnerable. That's how I see it, especially since I'm a pediatrician, a pediatric hematologist. So even knowing that we need to protect children, that does not mean that children cannot participate in research. In fact, they can. However, we have to be careful. First of all, you get their champion involved, and in this case, it's their parent or their guardian. The parent and guardian can help the child for the legal component of the consent. However, we don't want to just ignore the child. We also want to make sure the child understands to the best of their age what is going on and get what we call their assent, which is a version of consent that says that, hi, I know that I'm enrolling in this trial and I understand for an age appropriate level what the trial means. And with the parent can discuss the components that you saw in the skit, how to participate in the trial, and if at any time, if the parent and child want to remove themselves from the trial. And then even with the parent consent and the child's assent, there's the regular criteria that you heard discussed by Dr. Olalei and I believe the next speaker as well. But there's also some special criteria to keep in mind, and let's review those together. So there's 4 different situations that will make it okay or appropriate for children to participate in research. First, if it doesn't cause any harm or less than or equal to minimal risk. And minimal risk means whatever the typical daily risk is in our lives. So they already have their appointment, they were already coming in, And so you're only maybe doing a survey type of research where the parent and the child may fill out questions or take part of a poll. That is considered research too. But the reason why it's minimal risk or less than minimal risk is because it doesn't cause any pain or extra intervention. You're not giving a drug and you're not taking any blood or anything like that outside of what is normal care for the child. Another type of research that is slightly greater than minimal risk, but you know that it provides direct benefit for the child. So let's say we already know a therapy already works for a certain disease that we've tested in adults, and now we want to give it to children. There is a slight chance of risk because it is a new drug in children, but you know that it's going to address that disease process. And so it's important that we help the child become better. And so sometimes those studies will tell the family that, yes, this trial might have a little bit more than minimal than risk, but we see the big direct benefit. And then the family can decide when they compare the benefits and risk, whether this is appropriate for their child. I use the example of a therapy already approved in adults. That's usually the most common version of this. But sometimes there's also things that are maybe immediately life-threatening to the child that maybe only occurs in children, like certain types of cancer, that might have a trial as well. And let's go to the next one to kind of expand on that thought. What if it has greater than minimal risk, but there's no direct benefit to the child? How do you wrestle with joining a clinical trial like that? The only way we can think of it as being ethical is if that trial can increase knowledge about the child's disease, so that even if the child can't benefit, a future child with the same disease may be able to benefit. This is very common in cancer research. We all know cancer is a very difficult condition, and there's so many different types of it. We're happy that there's so many that we can treat, but then there's some that get very tough and we need to figure out smarter ways to fight it. In those circumstances, we don't want to overpromise a benefit to the child or to the family. So we say right up front that we're not sure if this is going to provide direct benefit. The only thing we are sure of is that it'll increase knowledge about the disease. And so this one is much tougher to engage in, but I work with Dr. Rouse, who's our next speaker, and we take care of kids with blood disorders and cancer. And a lot of times we discuss these very trials with them because we want them to know that some of the medications their child took, other parents from years ago agreed to the same type of trials so that we could learn how to fight the disease better. So to me, these three seem like enough. This is pretty heavy. You know, the first two, maybe we get it. The third one is something we don't ever want to be involved in, but you can understand why some families will accept that. So what about the fourth category? The fourth category says, serious problem affecting health or the welfare of children. So this step is not one that you can take lightly, and no doctor or no researcher can wave a paper in front of a family and say, hey, sign up for this. This one requires a national government health official to review. And what would compose of a serious problem? Well, we're living in one right now. We have the COVID-19 pandemic, but then there's other pandemics that could occur, or other big serious problems that are health crises that sometimes we might have to think of the welfare of the child above all else. I will say that this is very, very, very rare. Even in our pandemic, I believe there was a question and answer question about the COVID-19 vaccine. Even then, you notice that we put adults before children. But if there was ever a time where we felt that the problem was going to hurt many children all at once, it is sometimes worth investigating a trial that can save them. And so this takes a lot of thought process, and it would only be in the unique circumstances where a whole bunch of children would be affected at the same time. And I use pandemic because that's usually the best case scenario. That's the best example, of how a lot of people can be affected all at the same time. So I'm going to use an example from my world. I mentioned that I am a doctor that takes care of children with blood disorders and cancer. And the main blood disorder I take care of is sickle cell disease. And I believe some of you may already be familiar with this disease. But I wanted to show you an example timeline of what it takes for children to participate in research. Dr. Olalei has showed you all the things that I just snapshotted in this small component. Basically, before you even get into humans, you have to prove that the drug works in the lab and in various stages, as she went over. And then you can start phase 1 and phase 2 trials in adults. And that's what happened with hydroxyurea for sickle cell. They had seen that in the lab that hydroxyurea seemed to help sickle cell disease, but they wanted to make sure it works in humans. And so you started phase 1 and phase 2 trials. After that led to convincing information, and I'm going to highlight 1998 was actually when the drug was fully approved. But when they saw that it was working in adults safely, the companies and the researchers then submitted to the FDA, hey, we see that this is working in adults and everybody is okay. How do we start investigating in children? And so that's when those trials started. And so it would be an example of the one that's maybe greater than minimal risk because it's an unknown, but it can provide direct benefit to the child because they already saw that it provided direct benefit to adults. And so they started the first trials in children. But if you notice here, all of the rest of these say baby or children, baby, because they continue to make sure, what is this drug doing in children? Is it actually helping them? And now that the children are older, are we seeing signs that it actually helped them even more? And then they also looked at how it affects the disease. So they were able to see whether it helped with people at risk for stroke, whether it helps prevent organ damage. So you can see that even after a drug is approved, and I should have put a star right here, for hydroxyurea, it was approved by the federal government in 1998. It still was continued to be looked at in the post-marketing phase. And now it's used around the world to help people with sickle cell disease. So I'm going to stop here and thank you again for your time. I'm happy to take questions now or later. And I believe if there's questions down the road, Dr. Rouse, who's also a pediatric hematologist oncologist, can also help. Thank you.
Dr. Fashiba, thank you so much for explaining to us what goes into making sure children participate in clinical trials safely, ethically. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Ladd.
All right, so our next speaker for the day is Dr. Rouse. Dr. Rouse is a physician scientist in pediatric oncology at Baylor College of Medicine, Texas Children's Hospital, who spends her time leading research studies for difficult to treat blood cancers. She's passionate about ensuring equal access to and safeguards for underreported groups in clinical research and provides training on the importance of culturally competent communication in research. She leads the Diversity in Clinical Trials Task Force for the Dan L. Duncan Comprehensive Cancer Center and serves as the Associate Director of Community Engagement Outreach for the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity at Baylor College of Medicine. Born and raised in Houston, Dr. Rouse is an avid community volunteer and advocate, ensuring the community is educated on health-related topics. Her fluency in Spanish has allowed her to provide care and education around Texas and Latin America. Dr. Rouse, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. Turn it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I'll just say that I have been extremely impressed. And as someone who leads clinical trials, I still am learning many things today from our previous speakers. So I'm really excited to be here today. And I think this is a very timely presentation considering our previous speakers. And I want to talk about, should I participate in clinical trials? And when I say I or you, I want you to not only think about yourself, but think about friends, loved ones, colleagues that may come to you to ask for your advice. And I want everyone to be empowered to make the best informed decision for you and your loved ones. And you've heard that word informed reverberated throughout the morning. And so I'm going to go into a little detail about that. Here are my disclosures. I have research funding from a couple of companies and also serve on advisory boards. So why do we conduct clinical trials? I definitely won't belabor this because we've had amazing speakers who've gone into great detail, but in general, it's to add medical knowledge to the treatment, diagnosis, and prevention of diseases. So whether this is like Dr. Fashipe and I, who often will look for things that we can target within someone's disease, such as a mutation in a cancer, and look at how we can create a drug to target this, or whether this is looking at better preventive mechanisms for screening, for example, mammograms and colonoscopy, or whether this is a new surgical technique or a new device. There are lots of reasons that we conduct clinical trials, but the overwhelming reason is we are constantly trying to make therapies for patients easier, better, safer, and more effective. From a scientific and clinical perspective, proportional representation in clinical trials is important because we really want to ensure what we learn from the trials applies to everyone, regardless of race and ethnicity. And we all know that representation is key. And I think whether this occurred to you prior to 2020 or not, it certainly is at the forefront of everyone's mind with global pandemic of COVID-19. And so you guys will remember that as you're watching TV and you're learning and you're looking on social media and you're trying to understand how these COVID-19 vaccine trials are going, most of us thought, am I represented in that trial? Is it going to work the same in me? Is it going to be as safe in me? Is it going to be as effective in me? And that's key. So while the skepticism is real and understandable based on historic events, which we've heard about today, there are numerous safeguards that are in place to ensure history does not repeat itself. And so a number of our speakers have discussed this, and it is worth saying again, the Tuskegee syphilis events, as well as a number of other historical events that we heard about this morning, were directly responsible for many of the government mandated research safeguards that we have today. So this includes specific protections for anyone participating in a clinical trial, starting with informed consent, emphasis on the word informed. Researchers are required to include diverse patient populations because remember, representation is key. Clinical trial oversight is real, it is frequent, and it is designed for the sole purposes of protecting, informing, and ensuring the safety of all participants. So what is an institution?
Dr. Rouse, sorry to interrupt. Your camera is cutting off. If you could maybe just move it down a little bit.
Sure.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So what is an institutional review board and why and how does it work for you? And we've heard this term earlier this morning. And an institutional review board is made up of individuals whose sole responsibility is to review the safety and ensure that there are appropriate protections for anyone that is participating in a clinical trial. And so it's typically made up of at least one scientist, at least one non-scientist, at least one member who's not at all affiliated with the research center, a patient advocate, and a community member, plus other doctors, nurses, and researchers who are both within and outside the field of study. And importantly, these participants are unrelated and thus don't receive any direct benefit from the clinical trial that they are actually reviewing. So this is really important to ensure that there's no conflict of interest. So I've served on the Institutional Review Board at Baylor College of Medicine for almost 10 years, and it's been a really enlightening experience, and it's also helped me to better understand the safeguards that go into clinical research. What is a data safety monitoring board? So you may have heard of IRB before, but you may not be as familiar with data safety. So after you actually get approval, whether it's for one of those early phase trials, like a phase 1 trial that Dr. Olalei mentioned, or whether it's a later trial, you typically do have a board that is there to play different roles in clinical trial monitoring. And this is usually appointed, and sometimes they're called data monitoring committees. But these people are tasked with constantly reviewing the information at certain time points to ensure safety. And I'll say that I borrowed this picture from the NHLBI, but I had to make some modifications because there were no women on this board, and there certainly are women on real live ones, and I had to do some changing of some of the races and ethnicities. So a little trivia, on average, how many experts have reviewed a clinical trial for safety and appropriateness before it is even allowed to be presented to you? You want to have any ideas about this? You're welcome to respond in the chat. At least 100, usually more. So the type of research that I do is called immunotherapy. It's quite complicated, where we actually genetically modify cells within the laboratory to train them to target patients' cancer. And so we spend several years at the bench making these products. And then we have to go through a number of months and sometimes even years gathering all of the data, submitting it to the Food and Drug Administration. And then after that, we do a ton of testing. And so there's a long winding road to actually getting something from the bench to bedside. So I want you to understand that by the time something has made it to a phase 1 trial, it has been in study for lots and lots of time. So here's what I really want to focus on. What should you ask your doctor or healthcare provider when you're approached about a clinical trial? So why do researchers believe the study drug or intervention in this trial should be tested? Why do you think it would be effective? Like, why are you even doing this? Has it been tested before? How will it be determined what intervention I receive? Meaning, if I enroll on this trial, is it a guarantee that I will get this study drug? Or is it by chance, or what you may hear of as a randomization, which is like a flip of a coin? How do the risks, side effects, and benefits compare with the standard treatment or my current treatment? It's really important to know how your therapy and your care will change whether you enroll on the trial or not. Will I know whether I'm being treated with the study drug? Dr. Olalei discussed studies that may be blinded, for example. Will my doctor know? Will my nurse know? And if I don't receive the treatment on the trial, how will this affect my overall treatment, and how will it affect my health? How will you treat me? Will you give me an alternative drug that is the standard of care? Once you have this info, what else should you consider? What follow-up questions should you ask? So anytime I talk to one of my patients or their families about clinical trials, or if someone who's a loved one of mine is considering a clinical trial, I always want them to consider, how will this affect my day-to-day life, my family, my responsibilities? Will I still be able to work, for example? What do I actually have to do? What tests and procedures are there? How often? Is hospitalization required, where normally your treatment may be outpatient in the clinic? Would enrolling on a clinical trial actually make you have to be placed in the hospital? How long does the study last? And is there long-term follow-up on the study? So if enrolling on the study is taking a medicine for 3 months, for example, after that time period, do you have to be followed for safety? Do you have to be followed for effectiveness? And how does this compare with your general care? Will results be provided to me? Who will oversee my options while on this trial? And if I benefit from the trial, can I continue receiving the drug or treatment that often is received at no cost when you're enrolled on a clinical trial? Or if it's approved and it's beneficial to me, will my insurance cover it? And most importantly, when do I have to decide? Are you presenting this trial to me because I have a potentially really life-threatening illness? Or are you presenting it to me because a new option has come out and I'm doing pretty well in my current therapy, but you think this is something I might want to consider in the future? A well-designed clinical trial will have thought about the answers to each and every one of these questions and should be able to provide these answers for you. So in closing, I want everyone to be empowered, be an active participant in the informed consent discussion. This is not a one-way monologue where your physician or healthcare worker is telling you about the study and you don't have the ability to ask questions. Ensure you have anyone who will help in your decision-making process present. And if not, you can certainly tell your provider, you know, my cousin is a nurse. I'd really like her to weigh in on this. Can we call her on FaceTime? Ask about the time frame that you have to make a decision about participation. And if you want to take the consent form home to read, do so. Highlight it, circle things on it. And this really comes into play in understanding whether this is something that is urgent versus this is non-urgent. And your physician or your healthcare provider should be able to help you with that. If you don't understand something, please let your provider know. And ask about patient resources that may help you make a decision. Often you're presented with a consent form that, while it's been simplified because the Institutional Review Board has community members on there that ensure that it is in 7th grade understandable language, it also might turn out that you say, you know what, I want to hear a bit more about this. I want to see a graphic of this, or I want to see a video about this. And often those things exist. Be clear about what your treatment will look like if you don't enroll on the study, and factor this into your decision-making. Be clear about your options if you experience a side effect or even a personal or logistical reason that causes you to no longer want to participate. You can revoke your informed consent at any time. And this is a decision that it's important to make with your healthcare provider and with the study personnel, especially if you come off of a clinical trial, but you still need to be monitored for any side effects or any effectiveness. And most importantly, be comfortable with the informed decision that you make. And I will close there and thank everyone who is always involved in all of the research that I do, all of the education that I do, and obviously the organizers for having me. I'll stop sharing and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, Dr. Rouse, thank you so much for teaching us about the importance of proportional representation and also educating us about all of the safeguards that have been put in place to make sure that we're safe, or that how to be informed for our making decisions about clinical trials. I don't think there are any questions right this moment. So now we'll move to our last speaker in our speaker session, Dr. Pandit. Dr. Pandit is an associate professor of medicine in the pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine section at Baylor College of Medicine. She is board certified in internal medicine and pulmonary medicine, specializing in the care of patients in the intensive care unit. She serves as director of the Michael E. DeBakey Veteran Affairs Pulmonary Hypertension Program and has led the Baylor VA site on 2 multinational pharmaceutical clinical trials on COVID-19. She also co-chairs the Baylor College of Medicine Department of Medicine's IDEA Speaker Series, inviting experts to Houston to address challenges in inclusivity, diversity, and equity. She is dedicated to veteran care and research in underserved populations. Dr. Pandit enjoys spending time with her family while remaining culturally active in Houston's vibrant South Asian American community. Dr. Pandit, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, everything looks great.
Wonderful. I want to thank the CBMHR Engagement Corps for inviting me to speak on such an amazing topic, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all the speakers, and I feel a bit outmaneuvered by this amazing panel, and I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to be talking today about specifically COVID-19 treatment. trials and how it relates to minority health. As if we aren't sick of COVID-19 already. But I'm here to present some good news, certainly some good news when it comes to science, and also, where we're going and what we really need to continue improving on with regards to minority health and engagement in research. So the US population, when it comes to COVID-19, here is our breakdown of our general population as of recent census data. 61.5% white, 12.6% Black, 18% Hispanic, and the rest are Asian American and other. But then when we look at COVID-19 mortality, you see some interesting findings. There's clearly an increased representation in specifically Black and Hispanic population when it comes to those who are dying from COVID-19 compared to the placement within the US population census. So we call that a disproportionate mortality and case fatality rate. And what that basically means and translates to is that Hispanic and Black persons are disproportionately represented among those who have died from COVID-19. So Black and Hispanics constitute 44% of COVID-19 deaths, despite representing only 31% of the US population. And this was identified early on in the pandemic as a major problem. And here, just to break it down more, you see here, let me focus on specific statistics for you. You see here within certain minority populations, even though the case rate is this much, the hospitalization rate and the death rate referenced to our white American brothers and sisters is much higher. And again, problematic and identified early on in the pandemic. And so knowing all this, did we adjust our treatment and management of COVID-19? Well, let's see, and that's what I'm going to present to you. The disease is divided into mild, moderate, and the more severe forms of infection. My colleagues and I in the intensive care unit usually take care of moderate to severe disease. Thankfully, most COVID-19 remains mild and not requiring hospitalizations. But as I showed you in the previous slides, African-American populations and Hispanic populations in this country tend to have a disproportionate amount of moderate to severe disease and ultimately fatality. And so when we look at the science of the disease, we look at the stage 1, early infection, and that's when the virus is kind of taking hold in our lungs, epithelial cells. And as a pulmonary intensive care doctor, we have a particular interest in the way these virions attach to the lung cells. And this is when, you first feel the mild constitutional symptoms of fever, that dry cough. There won't be too many laboratory findings. Sometimes the x-ray may be even clear, but this is the initial phase. And many of the people who are infected with mild symptoms often do not require hospitalization. At this point, we do have particular antibodies that have been approved, and these are for outpatient therapy. It's one-time infusion. Some of you may be familiar with this. You can usually obtain this through most ERs, particularly in the medical center. Well, then what about moderate disease? Well, this is where you have more increased shortness of breath. You probably need some oxygen. Usually you require hospitalization at this point to be monitored. You may or may not have some signs of kidney and liver disease. And these are the drugs that have been shown to be developed as beneficial in moderate disease. And I'll just quickly go through them. Remdesivir, dexamethasone, which is basically a steroid, oxygen therapy. And then I'll just highlight at the bottom a drug called Tocilizumab, which we'll get back to in a little bit. And that's a mouthful, type of antibody. And then we get to the severe disease. The severe disease biologically is thought to be due to something called the host inflammatory response. And this is basically when our own body mounts a very hyperinflammatory excess immune response to the initial viral infection. And oftentimes, in this case, our own body's response causes more damage to our organs than the initial viral infection. And so what do we do here? Pretty similar, but less research showing benefit. Again, steroids have been shown to help reduce morbidity and mortality in the stage 3 hyperimmune phase, as well as certainly oxygen, sometimes mechanical ventilation. And then again, tocilizumab has been shown to be somewhat beneficial in that group as they're progressing to severe disease. So I'm just showing you the science of this hyperinflammatory response. Basically, what we were looking at with tocilizumab was specifically this molecule called IL-6. And I should say that a lot of this research that we've done to identify these drugs basically condensed the usual 20 years of research from preclinical animal models that Dr. Olalei's group has done so painstakingly, and what Dr. Fasipe's group showed us can take 20 years sometimes. So the good news with COVID is we have really extrapolated research from a 20-year process to pretty much a 2-year process now, which is phenomenal and gives us a lot of confidence in the science. And so the science, basically, I cannot take credit for this, was a molecule called IL-6 that many colleagues before me have identified is involved in this hyperimmune response. And so another treatment, which everybody is talking about, and probably the biggest positive response, is regarding the COVID vaccine. And yes, the vaccine is a treatment. Here's the interesting thing, though. In order for the COVID vaccine to be efficacious and really make a dent in this pandemic, we need 60 to 72% of our population vaccinated. We're not quite there yet, as you may hear, but we're definitely getting there. And our hope by the federal government and by local institutions is to do that. And much of the discussion that we all are having today is regarding involving minority populations in vaccination and public health measures. And so just to show you, this was a little bit a while ago, but this was back in October, right before the vaccines came out and the first 2 were approved by the FDA. How likely are you to get a COVID vaccine as it becomes available was asked to the entire US population and then divided between white Americans and Black Americans. And you see here, back in October, 58% on average likely to take the vaccine, which had actually dropped. That has slightly increased now, but we're still not near the 68 to 70% needing to achieve herd immunity, which is again why public engagement is so important when it comes to COVID-19 treatments and vaccination. And as I said, Black Americans were less likely to say they would get vaccinated back in October. And so knowing that this disease has some disparities, how do we address this when it comes to clinical research and trial structure? And, the New England Journal of Medicine, premier medical journal, addressed this head on. They didn't pussyfoot around it. They said, as we strive to overcome social and structural causes of healthcare disparities, we must recognize the underrepresentation of minority groups in the COVID-19 clinical trials. And because everything about COVID-19 was extrapolated and really put on the fast track, it was a good thing for medical science to really acknowledge this head on, particularly addressing the history, as Dr. Sotoke had said, of the lack of minority involvement in clinical trials. And so the racial disparity within COVID clinical trials, was still present. Certainly the ACT-1 trial, which is the main trial that established the role of remdesivir, that antiviral, included sites where Black, Latinx, and Native Americans are overrepresented. But importantly, these groups were substantially underrepresented in the study samples. And here you see a graphic of that. White population was the predominant population in these trials across the states that were represented, despite the fact that minority groups were represented in the overall population there. So remdesivir specifically, data supporting the drug's efficacy and safety in minority groups was thus thought to be limited. And that's because they were not included as highly as thought in the original clinical trials. Specifically, Black Americans only accounted for 20% in the ACT-1 trial, which is the randomized control trial that established the efficacy of remdesivir. And then importantly, they only accounted for 11% of the 397 patients randomly assigned to remdesivir in another pharmaceutical study. And same with Latinx and Native American patients. And so again, the modest benefits seen in clinical improvement with remdesivir may not be generalizable to minority populations given the differences in disease severity and outcomes. And so this is a major problem with the COVID clinical trials when it comes to remdesivir, one of the primary treatments in COVID-19. And so let's get back to this slide. What about tocilizumab? Recently added to the NIH armamentarium for approval for COVID-19, and we're just starting to use this now in the hospital more frequently. And so I was very proud to actually be part of this trial. The important thing about tocilizumab, which is an antibody against IL-6, one of those hyperimmune markers, is that it was mostly done in underserved populations, mostly men though, not women, unfortunately. And my co-I, Dr. Troutner, Barbara Troutner here, and myself, and this is us with our gear on in clinic, washing our hands very vigorously. We were very fortunate to be part of this trial that was a multi-site trial across the country that looked at the efficacy of tocilizumab in hospitalized patients. And this was a phase 3 trial, as has been described by the previous speakers. So again, really extrapolated rate of science. And what our colleagues and us were able to show was in this demographics of a total 317 patients, we tried to really recruit patients from previously underrepresented groups, specifically in Hispanic or Latino American groups. 143 patients were in the tocilizumab group, whereas 63 patients were in the placebo group. Black Americans, 14% in the treatment group and 16% in the placebo group, and 13% of American Indian or Alaska Native in the treatment group and 11% in the placebo group. And this was higher than previous COVID treatment trials, and it really kept the focus on underserved minority populations. And what we were able to show in this specific minority population that was more than 80% minority was that the likelihood of progression to mechanical ventilation or death at 1 month was significantly lower among patients who received tocilizumab compared to standard.
Dr. Pandit, sorry to cut you off. You have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. So that's why this particular study raised some interest among the scientific community. I just want to show you the racial breakdown within the COVID-19 vaccine trials. Pfizer and Moderna are the 2 mRNA trials that have been approved. And I just wanted to show you this data and focus in on the enrollment, 10% in the Pfizer trial, 10% in the Moderna trial. And again, you know, although Black Americans represent 12% of the population, 10% represented in these trials. Not quite up to snuff, but getting better compared to historical values. And so importantly, the take-home points I take from this is that people of color are still underrepresented in the clinical trials for the 2 initial COVID-19 vaccine, but more diverse than previous historic trials. And the safety and efficacy were similar for people of color. And that's very important to increase confidence and willingness to get the vaccine. And so let's just jump why we need to improve minority health and research. So we need to address the history, as Dr. Sudake very, very emotionally charged showed us in that very moving video. Address the history and perceptions of conjured feels of fear and exploitation, and allow our patients to gain information about cancer care and clinical trials, as our previous speakers have very elegantly shown us. Address the lack of representation in science and industry. Who are running these trials? And we have fantastic scientists who have spoken to us today. Where are the Black women in STEM leadership? And when we train diverse women to become leaders, the whole system benefits. Women were afforded 20% of the doctorates in STEM, Black women, but only 5% of the top supervising managerial jobs. That's a problem. And so these are the things that can also affect vaccine hesitancy. Where is the source of information coming from? Our public health officials trusted more than politicians. On average, older people and Black people and women are less willing to be vaccinated. And so we need to address why that is. And perhaps it is the public health messaging. We have to improve the scientific validity of our epidemiologic design. And what that means is not all diseases represent and manifest the same amongst minority populations compared to our white population. And so we need to address this head on. These gaps can leave us a problem in terms of informing clinical and public health. And so we need to address the differences between minority group health when it comes to health and access to care, as well as living and working conditions. What kind of access and conditions do our minority underserved populations have compared to others? And the CDC has kind of begun to address this head on. And so I want to focus on the last part, particularly adapt public health recommendations to community circumstances. And I want to just highlight one of my colleagues who is starting to do this. Dr. Marcela Nunez-Smith has actually recently been named a member of the COVID-19 task force and appointed by the president to chair the Health Equity Task Force. So she addresses this head on. How do you advocate for healthcare equity and engage in the communities? And I know that our panel are experts in this today, people in the right trials that affect their everyday lives. Thank you very much.
Dr. Pandit, thank you so much for educating us about all of the the COVID-19 treatments and whatnot, and helping us to kind of make some sense of this, because it's a lot. And thank you for the work you and your colleagues have done thus far to try to increase representation and diversity. Okay, so next we'd like to move to our next skit. The Office of Outreach and Health Disparities through Baylor College of Medicine is going to share with us a different version of the skit entitled Todas Ganamos.
José, tienes que oír esto, amigo. Esta mañana, cuando iba al centro comunitario a mi juego de dominó, vi un volante que llamó mi atención. Al comienzo pensé que algo regalarían, ya sabes, me encantan las cosas gratis. Pero leyendo con cuidado, era un anuncio sobre un estudio clínico sobre ejercicios que está haciendo la universidad. Lucía interesante. Exacto, estoy tratando de volver a hacer ejercicios. Mi hija Laura últimamente ha estado detrás de mí para que tome mi salud más seriamente. Ella me cuenta sobre tanta gente enferma que ve ahí en el hospital donde ella trabaja como enfermera, que no quiere que yo termine como ellos. Dice que esa gente no cuida algunos aspectos importantes de su salud, como el azúcar en la sangre, colesterol, fumar o estar obeso, que todo eso puede ocasionarles daños terribles, como contraer la diabetes, enfermedades del corazón, o cáncer más fácilmente si es que uno no se cuida. Tú sabes que estoy tratando de estar en forma. Así que me dio curiosidad saber si ese estudio clínico era una buena oportunidad para continuar por el camino correcto. Le comenté eso a Laura esta tarde cuando me llamó. Aparentemente hay muchos estudios clínicos que ayudan a la gente a tener mejores tratamientos para una serie de enfermedades y desean mejorar su salud, así como tú y como yo. Ella estaba muy emocionada y dijo que esto podría ayudarme a mantenerme motivado. Ya sé que necesito tomar en serio esto, así que pensé que sería bueno si los dos nos registramos. Como ve, compadre, de esa manera podemos hacer el programa de ejercicios juntos. Exactamente eso le pregunté a Laura. ¿Realmente para qué yo me registraría? Ella me explicó que es muy simple. Mientras dure el estudio, ellos pagarán la consulta de los doctores y el entrenamiento especial. Ella dice que es una buena forma de hacerse los exámenes gratis. Ellos te miden la presión arterial, el colesterol, el azúcar en la sangre, y eso nos puede ayudar a tener una vida más saludable. Lo único que tenemos que hacer es presentarnos a las citas y a las clases. Incluso si te registras pero no te gusta, podemos salirnos en cualquier momento. Ahora ya sé qué pensamientos te preocupan. Estas cosas siempre son manejadas por el gobierno y ellos lo que quieren es tener nuestra información. Pero Laura dice que la universidad solo mantiene la información del estudio y que ellos no pueden ni deben compartir esa información con nadie. Además, ellos no usan nuestros nombres ni nuestra información personal. Ellos solamente pueden usar la información que puede ayudarles a ver si el programa está ayudándonos a estar más saludables. Oye, también me dijo que no hay mucha gente como nosotros que le interese participar en estos estudios. Y eso no está bien, porque eso significa que los doctores no saben lo suficiente sobre algunas cosas que afectan a la gente hispana como nosotros. Los doctores necesitan saber lo que funciona para nosotros y así darnos mejor atención médica. Entonces es importante que nosotros participemos. Sí, parece que todos ganamos. Entonces, ¿qué dice, compadre? ¿Te animas? Excelente. Les llamaré para ver cómo nos inscribimos. Bueno, José, tengo que dejarte ahora porque parece que llegó mi hija Laura y me trae algo de comer. Sí, yo te llamo después. Sí, de acuerdo. Hasta luego. Acaba de ver Quick Reels para la salud de la comunidad. Por favor, encuéntrenos en YouTube o visite nuestro sitio web para ver otras presentaciones y el calendario de los segmentos en vivo.
I hope everyone enjoyed that skit. And as a reminder, our conference survey link is in the chat. Please access the link. You can access it right now. Please access the link and complete the survey so that way you will be entered for a $15 gift card. We love to get your feedback so that we know what to do for the next conference and upcoming events. All right, so we're moving on. We have a quick presentation from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Myeloma is a type of cancer that starts in the bone marrow. You may hear myeloma being referred to as multiple myeloma. As we know, African Americans have twice the incidence of multiple myeloma as white Americans. Recent studies show that African Americans are significantly less likely to receive newest treatments, combination therapies, and more likely to experience treatment delays, including transplant delays. In response to disparities in incidence and access to myeloma treatment among Blacks and African Americans, LLS launched myelomalink in 2017 with two goals: to educate African American communities about myeloma and to help patients in these communities navigate the treatment landscape more effectively and cope with the disease. So how does myelomalink work? Part of our programming includes community awareness education programs and other outreach activities, including church outreach through various activities, both in person and virtually, including health sermons during services. Also presenting myeloma education programs for primary care providers at community health centers. We do this to outline the importance of primary care role in timely referral to a hematologist oncologist. If you or a loved one are diagnosed with myeloma or another blood cancer or want to get involved, contact us at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society at 1-800-955-4572. We have trained professionals that are knowledgeable about myeloma and can guide you through treatment options, financial support, and local resources.
Okay, hello, good morning, everyone. We are moving on to the panel session. And the purpose of this session is to discuss clinical research from the perspectives of clinical research investigators, a research coordinator, research pharmacist, research program manager, clinical research participant, and somebody who sits on an IRB, which Dr. Rouse mentioned earlier. Institutional review boards are a group of people who get together to review possible research and give their approval for the research protocol. So we're going to have these people sort of answer questions. Some of you have already submitted questions that they will be responding to. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce them. We have an excellent group of people that we've put together for this panel. And I am going to ask, if you are sitting on the panel, it is okay for you to turn your camera on at this time. I will begin with Rosalind Randall. Rosalind Randall has been a clinical research associate at Baylor College of Medicine for almost 15 years. She's worked with several cancer treatment trials, several registries, and is currently working on CAR T-cell treatment therapies. She's a native Houstonian and enjoys serving the youth at her church. Next, we have Ana Dulce Hernandez Herrera, who is a project manager for a cancer-funded grant at Baylor College of Medicine. She has been working in research for at least 12 years and has clinical research experience focusing on education and clinical trial enrollment of Hispanic, underserved, and vulnerable populations. She is also a hospice volunteer, birth doula, and a sheepdog steward. Dr. Celia Fencer-Roy is an investigational drug services coordinator for Harris Health Systems. She is a graduate of Texas Southern University with her PharmD degree, and she worked in the pharmaceutical industry before she took this role, where she ensures that clinical trials are carried out effectively, safely, efficiently by managing that investigational drug products. Dr. Dominic Gwynn has experience as a research participant, and she currently teaches at Texas Southern University in the Department of Health, Kinesiology, Sports Studies. And her research interests are in HIV/AIDS, cardiovascular disease, medication management, but she has personal experience being part of a clinical trial. So I will let her talk a little bit more about that. And you all have met Dr. Rain Rouse, who spoke with us a little bit earlier. And in this context, she's going to talk to us about being a member of an IRB review board. Dr. Courtney Miller Chisholm is a native Houstonian, and is an assistant professor in hematology oncology at Baylor College of Medicine. And she attends on the inpatient and outpatient clinics at Bentop and Smith Clinic. She is the program director for Hematology Oncology Fellowship, a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, a wife and mother to an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. And Dr. LaQuisa Hill is an assistant professor of medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. She is board certified in internal medicine and hematology oncology with expertise in stem cell transplantation and cellular therapy. Her primary interests are the treatment of blood cancers, using cellular therapy and complications of these treatments. While she's not working, she likes to travel, spend time with family and friends, and indulge in being a foodie. So if all my speakers would please turn on their cameras and we can stop sharing so we can see them well. Awesome. Okay, let's see if I can make this a gallery view. Okay, I think that's better. That way we can see everyone's face at the same time. All right, thank you all so much for being here. I'm just gonna start it off because I know we are crunched for time and there's so much we want to know and so much we want to share. I am gonna start with Dominique. Is it okay if I use first names? Yes, yes, okay. You guys are awesome. All right, Dominique, I'd love to hear why you decided to participate in the clinical trial.
In short, it was my best chance for survival. In November 2016, I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, pH positive, a gene that makes the leukemia cells grow faster. I initially was treated at St. Luke's, but moved to MD Anderson because, and they made it very clear to me, they had two hands and I needed more than what they had. But when I got to MD Anderson, they let me know that, the success rate for my cancer, had increased from 14% 5-year survival rate to about 71% because of a new class of drugs. And, they offered a clinical trial to me in a wonder drug called ponatinib. And I mean, honestly, when I presented Dr. Ndefo, I was, I was in bad shape. So it was my best chance for survival. 20 years before, my daughter had participated in a clinical trial. So I was aware of the safeguards, the legislation. So I was educated when I went in, but again, it was my best chance for survival.
Thank you. Yes, I think for a lot of people, it is that question of, what other choice do you have? But there are other types of trials too. There are other types of clinical trials that are not necessarily for people who are sick or people who have a specific condition. So I would like to ask Courtney, when you have clinical trials, what kind of patients are you looking for, or when you're conducting clinical trials?
Sure, so that's a very good question. Every clinical trial has something that's called inclusion criteria. And what that means is that for that particular trial, it has been determined the characteristics that you want in the patients that are being evaluated for whatever it may be. So in the event that you are testing a particular drug to see if it's going to be effective, it depends on the diagnosis. So one, you would need to have a diagnosis that's specific for that particular trial. There's typically an age range. So if this is a pediatric clinical trial, then you would want that to be specific for kids. But if it's for adults, then the age range would be specified. But often it's like 18 to 65, and sometimes elderly patients may be excluded, or maybe it's going to be a trial that's specific for elderly patients. A lot of times we're looking for patients that are in healthy condition, that have good organ function. But again, all of those things depend on the inclusion criteria. So it's a very dependent on whatever's being tested. That's in cancer world for sure. There are other clinical trials, such as if we're trying to test a medicine for high blood pressure, then of course you would have to have the diagnosis of high blood pressure. You know, there may be other characteristics that may be very important that this particular trial is trying to evaluate. So you always have to be mindful of what that inclusion criteria may be. I think one thing to specify is that with our patients who are entering clinical trials, and as clinical investigators, we always want our patient population or a study population to look very similar to the actual prevalence of the disease. And I think what we find, especially in the cancer world, is that there are certain cancers that are fairly prevalent in African Americans or Latino patients, but we're not seeing that reflected in our patient population. And that's why we really want to see more minorities so that we can have that study population look a lot more like what we are seeing in the real world, to make sure that these patients are, that what we're seeing in the studies are reflective of what we're going to see in our patients, particularly our minority patients.
Thank you very much. That's a great transition to my next question. Dr. Hill, you're a research investigator. How do you recruit patients? What's your process like for that?
So my first name is Lakisa. I don't want anyone to think, you know, getting special treatment here. So, you know, for me as an oncologist, that process is probably a little different compared to researchers that are recruiting healthy volunteers or healthy patients. So typically, you know, those patients are recruited via maybe flyers, whether it's paper flyers, news paper flyers, radio announcements, occasionally maybe even things that might have short clips on TV. A lot of the recruitment that I utilize is actually through my colleagues in the field of oncology. And so essentially when we have a trial that we're opening, we start spreading the word amongst, it starts usually with the people at our center because those patients are local. They're the easiest for us to get our hands on. They will refer patients to see us. And then we discuss with colleagues at other centers, which may be here locally in Houston and often is from other states. There's also a website called clinicaltrials.gov that actually lists every clinical trial that is approved or in the process of being approved for activation for any and all disease types. And so often family or patients themselves find that website, and it is open to the public, and they will go on there and search for trials that are relevant for their disease, and they will reach out to us. So Dr. Rouse and I run several studies together, and we often will get emails from family members, our patients themselves that have found our study even before their physicians know about it. And then they're able to loop us in with their treating team, and we can go from there. And then, most of the trials that we do are early phase 1. So those studies where we're really looking at safety more so than efficacy or how well it works. But as we start to generate data and treat more and more patients on those studies, then we present that data at national meetings and conferences. And then that starts to get the information out even more broadly to again, mostly colleagues, but we get referrals even internationally just from presenting data at some of these meetings where the audience is much larger, much broader.
Okay, so I love that, because what I hear is that I can find studies that are related to me, myself. So if I'm interested in participating, I can go to clinicaltrials.gov. I can look for this information and I can bring it to my physician and advocate for myself. Okay, so that's a very key piece of information, because I think a few people have asked that question in the chat today. So thank you so much for that answer.
You're welcome.
Anna, you know, we've talked about participating in clinical trials. How does clinical research benefit minority communities? Why should we be looking to increase that minority participation? You know, what are y'all doing to help increase that minority participation?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. So the first thing is knowledge is power. So when the community participates in these clinical trials, it helps to produce knowledge that is applicable back to the community. So that's one of the first things that I see as a benefit of participation. Another thing is for underserved populations and minorities. Sometimes these communities need more hand-holding during their process. Yeah. And so when you're in a clinical trial, you have a research nurse, a clinical coordinator, sometimes you have a doctor on call that can help you. So the main focus is for them to make sure that you're safe, but also sometimes they act as navigators and support, even emotional support for these patients. So that helps the patients to feel a little bit better. Another way in which we benefit is because sometimes we need to feel like whatever process we're living through of disease or hardship, it has some purpose. So when I participate, I'm generating this knowledge that may not help me directly, but it can help my community along the way. So that's kind of like the ways in which I see the participation can help the community. Also, you build a rapport with the medical community that brings trust back to the community, which is very important for health outcomes. What I do, I'm here today this morning. I have been a translator, I have been a coordinator, I have produced materials, I try to stay engaged. Right now, my position at Baylor is outside of the clinic, so I'm helping on the preclinical part of studies. So I'm making sure that whatever tissues was donated by patients are being used for the purpose that they were supposed to be, and pushing the preclinical trials. And I keep myself engaged and try to educate myself, my community, my husband, providers. Sometimes the providers need different perspective, right? So I try to use my voice to like keep pushing all the research moving forward.
Thank you, thank you. That's very important, is that we can all serve as ambassadors in our regular lives, in our real lives. We can, you know, encourage the people around us to participate if they hear or if they're interested. And Jocelyn, I'm going to ask you the next question. What measures have you found effective and encouraging, just like, you know, we just talked about, but what measures have you found to be effective in encouraging eligible patients to participate? So I know I'm eligible. How do you, you know, get us to look over some of that murky history that Dr. Shodek had talked about at the beginning of experimentation in underserved populations?
Most of the time, I try to be really, really honest with my patients. So I start off with honesty and I ask them what's stopping them. What's your question? I ask them what things are on their mind that's making them hesitant to continue to do the trial, to sign up, to move forward. And I try to just go from there. And when I do that part, it usually opens the doors for the conversation to lead to where they feel comfortable, and then also giving them enough time to not feel pressured. You know, this is not a race. We want them to be comfortable, agreeing to put your care. You know, I'm an intermediary, I'm here, but I want you to be comfortable dealing with the doctors. So I just try to make sure they know that every question is going to be answered. There's okay to have questions, ask the doctor questions, and just start off just like that, because I'm usually the first person to kind of grease the patients and I prep them for the doctor. And then I want to make sure going in, if they're nervous and they're uncomfortable, I want to make sure I pass that off to the team so we can keep that going. So usually that works, just giving them that time and that dedication sitting down.
That's awesome. I feel like that's necessary for any clinical trial that's being conducted, to have someone like you there to sort of help build that you know, information, or bridge that information gap, if you will. Rain, you serve as an IRB member. So is there a regulatory mechanism, I guess, in the clinical phase 1, 2, 3 trials to ensure diverse population participation in the trials before the FDA approves a product?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Such a good question. So every time we receive a clinical trial that comes to our review board to review, we expect that they have included a plan of how they will ensure the population is diverse. You can imagine that that may look a bit different depending on the disease, because if you're studying a disease such as multiple myeloma, which does disproportionately affect African Americans, you can expect that there may be a predominance of African Americans. If you're studying a disease that is more prevalent in one population than the other, there's not a rule that says you have to enroll exactly the way the population lists, but there are actual questions that researchers have to answer and have a detailed plan about how they will ensure that the recruitment is diverse, including ensuring that the informed consent is translated to other languages, ensuring that it is in understandable language. Now, importantly, even when you seek funding for your research, the National Institutes of Health has specific questions for even bench researchers about the diversity of your mice, for example. You can't study all male mice or all female mice, and you have to have an explanation. So this is important because it starts at the earliest time point. And there was a great question in the chat about someone who's new to cancer research disparities and thinking about how you can be the most impactful. We need to have a seat at the table. So when Drs. Miller and Hill and I are sitting down, when Jocelyn and I are sitting down and we're looking at patients that are there, when Anna is looking at at tissue banking, we're wanting to make sure that we say, hey, is this representative of the population? Do we have African Americans? Do we have enough of the Latinx population? So starting, it's been actually very enheartening to me to see that this process is starting much earlier, which is starting with bench researchers, starting in animal model work, because you have the groundwork set to ensure that when you roll this out to patients, it absolutely is mirroring our diverse population. We've come a long way, and for good reason, and we're still recognizing the way that we have to go.
Thank you. Thank you. So that is really helpful for us to understand everything that goes on sort of behind the scenes. Dr. Fenseroy, study has been approved.
Yes.
Right? And you are at Harris Health Systems and study's been approved. It gets presented to you. What do you do when that study gets assigned? What happens then? How do we kick it off?
Well, here's the other part of the background to the research. So our role is to step in and actually look at the drug that's going to be investigated and determine feasibility and resources that are needed to make sure that how do I dispense this drug and make sure it's dispensed safely and effectively. So I sit down, I start looking at all the teams that are actually involved. We consider ourselves to be a liaison between the principal investigator and the coordinator and the sponsor. Everybody knows their roles, but not everybody knows what each role entails. So I double check, I'm making sure that there's appropriate labeling. I'm making sure that we are following all the guidelines in regards to regulatory agents. Key thing is safety. You know, patients have rights, medication administration rights. So my job is to make sure that the trial is ethical. The trial, there is a consent form on file for the patients. I'm looking to make sure that it's going to the right patient, right drug, right dose. Even if it's blinded, there are trials where they're double blinded. There are trials where I'm the only one who's aware of what's being dispensed. So we have a key role in there. And biggest thing is mostly just making sure everything is done appropriately and orderly from a safety perspective.
Okay, that helps with that level of comfort about what's going on. But a follow-up question I have for you. Since we're based in Houston, Harris Health is, you know, a giant in Houston. how do I find specific opportunities to participate at your institution?
That is a great question. We have a lot of research going on at Harris Health System. So we actually have a department called the Research and Sponsored Programs. So from a provider perspective, they could actually reach out to that department, Research and Sponsored Program. That would be at research@harrishealth.org. Or patients who are actually coming in to see their providers, I would ask them to talk to their caregiver and say, are there any clinical trials going on? Harris Health is considered one of the top institutions in regards to research and just the patient population. We have such a diverse patient population, so there's a lot of research that goes on because we see how many patients could benefit in the community. So it's a great place. So I would suggest from a patient perspective to reach out to their provider and ask them if there are any clinical trials that they think that they could possibly benefit from. In my opinion, in my team's opinion, we always say that anybody who participates in research, those are the true heroes, because these are patients right now. COVID is going on. We wouldn't be where we are right now if it hadn't been for people who are taking the time to want to do something for themselves, but also just help mankind. So research is key, and we appreciate any and everybody. The young lady who spoke earlier, we truly appreciate her stepping up and doing research.
Thank you. Thank you. That is awesome. I just saw a comment from Latarsha C. Dr. Gwen, thank you for sharing that. You have no idea how you just touched me in my studies and personal endeavors to fight on for health and wellness. So you are already making a difference. And I have another question for you. Is clinical research, do you find that in our minority communities, that clinical research is still considered controversial or not seen in a good light? This is a question that was actually submitted by one of our attendees. So do you find that it's still controversial and still not seen in a good light?
Of course it is, and we have seen that's how we opened this morning, right? There are historical reasons why some communities don't trust the medical system. So you have that, for example, for the African American community, that you have to acknowledge that. You cannot say, oh, you know, we have changed and this is, no, you have to stand to where they are and try to understand where they're coming from. So yeah, there's still some like barriers for communities to join clinical research. That's African American, for example. Like in my community, we have in Houston a big Hispanic community that is concerned about migratory issues, right? So like if, as we just saw it on the video, like if I sign for this, is this information gonna be shared with the government? Are they gonna come and look for me after? So that's another thing that we need to acknowledge, and it's a barrier for like my community to join clinical studies. Also, we have to acknowledge that we have different ways of life. Some people cannot take the time to attend the extra visits for clinical trials. They don't have the transportation. They don't have payday leaves from work. So they either go to work and feed their families or attend clinical trial, right? So in that context, it's like a very complex task that we have in front of ourselves, but we should understand all that complexity and try to facilitate. And I know that from like being have experience as a clinical coordinator, we try our best to like facilitate. We create educational things. We give like transportation vouchers. We call the family so they don't forget. Like we do all those things to try to bring the communities closer to medical research, because it's important for all of us.
Thank you. That's very important. And based on that answer, Dominique, I want to ask you this. Should people expect to get paid for being in a clinical trial?
I was not compensated for my participation in a clinical trial. However, I want you to look at it like this. I was given access to a drug at no cost that Blue Cross Blue Shield now pays $30,000 for monthly. Also extensive testing. And I'm here to tell the story today because of. So to me, that was all the compensation. Now, there are clinical trials that reimburse participants for time and travel, university and research groups do compensate. But no, I didn't receive any compensation. Honestly, I didn't expect any. My compensation was just, I'm here. And something else I'd like to add, 3 weeks ago, I attended the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's, their blood cancer conference, one of the community events that Ms. Erica was speaking of. And I heard there was a physician talking about my cancer specifically. And, I was kind of scared listening because he talked about, just the raw statistics, 5-year survival rate, but here I am year 6. And he talked about MD Anderson, the wonderful research they were doing, ponatinib, and then he talked about minimal residual disease, which is what I have right now. And he talked about, the game-changing medications for that. Well, that medication is something that was offered to me 3 years ago. So I feel like I am getting first dibs almost at groundbreaking drugs. And that's the fact that I'm here is compensation enough for my.
Okay, that gave me goosebumps. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let me see, let me go back to my notes because I got lost in your answer. I wasn't even looking at my papers anymore. Okay, where are we? Let me gather myself. That was very impactful. Thank you.
While you're looking at your notes, can I make a quick comment about that also? I think we all, every time you speak, Mrs. Gwen, I think we all are kind of get goosebumps, and we are so appreciative as a leukemia researcher, and many of my colleagues on here are as well.
I thank you.
Thank you, because we wouldn't be able to do it without you. And you are a strong advocate for patients. You are a strong advocate for research teams. And we learn everything that we learn from people like you. And hallelujah to 6 years. I also just want to add that if you are being asked to participate in research where there's no potential benefit to you, often the IRB will require that there's some compensation, or if it is something that will be quite strenuous to your schedule, for example. So if you're asking a healthy college student to come and do sleep studies multiple times throughout the week, they typically will require that you receive some sort of voucher. So it's important to know that depending on the circumstance, it may or may not be appropriate for you to receive compensation, and that compensation could be a Starbucks gift card, or it could be paying for your parking, et cetera. So I don't want anyone to think it's an inappropriate question. And also, even if you are receiving a drug free of cost, if there are additional study visits that will be disruptive to your life, you have your kids at home, you have to do this. We all know how expensive it is to park in the medical center. There's nothing wrong with asking about resources, because often, even if you are not paid, you certainly can be compensated, and that is only appropriate, as Anna so gracefully put it.
And Ms. Ross, I'll add that part of, your care and services, the social work team comes and shares the different resources with you. I remember giving, getting an actual, a car to take care of, my parking and different things like that. So there are resources out there and available for you. And they do, I know that my care team, informed me of all of those.
That's really important to know. You got me with the parking, because parking at the medical center hurts my heart every time. So yes, very, very important. Lakisa, somebody asked, I feel like in my 24 years of life, a young person, obviously, my family has never been reached out to participate in any type of clinical research. Is this rare?
No, I would say that's probably common for most of us. I mean, and it really just depends on the goal of the clinical trial and what the purpose of it is. Most people are not sought out unless they happen to have some type of illness, which they're under the frequent care of a healthcare provider or healthcare team. But usually, especially when we're younger, we don't have a lot of medical problems. Hopefully, we're not really going to the doctor frequently, maybe just once a year for your routine visit. So, and these trials, they have a lifespan. So one trial may be open that you might have potentially qualified for as a healthy participant, but if you weren't seen during the lifespan of that trial, it may have closed and then it's no longer an option for you, and so your provider might not bring it up. So I would say absolutely that it is not unusual and it is not a rare thing. Most people don't get approached about participating in clinical trials. And the ones that are targeting, observational or trying things in healthy patients, those are usually advertised somewhere, usually on academic campuses or university hospitals, where they have the resources in terms of research and financial, a grant funding to provide those studies. But in the general community, it doesn't really tend to happen, and that's okay. That's totally normal.
And I will also just add that even advertisements for studies have to be reviewed by the institution.
Yes, have to be approved by the IRB.
Appropriate. So even if you want to do a, like if you wanted to do a radio ad on TSU's radio or TV station, it would have to be approved. And also, if you are having a study, especially one that might compensate, because we were all very rich in college, right? So we would never sign up for a study. So you have to ensure that it's very clear that there's no coercion and that it is not going to affect a student's ability to pass a class and things like that. When you are actually pulling from the research pool of people that are at a job or an institution. So great answer, Dr. Hill.
Thank you very much for that. And it's a great segue into my next question, which is for Jocelyn. How have you organized your most successful engagement feedback from minority communities? How have you been able to pull in that hard to reach community for any of the studies that you've worked on?
Basically, again, honesty. I kind of sit down and I talk to them and address things from my personal standpoint, as if they were my family. People have questions. People are nervous, people are scared, people don't like going to the doctor. And all my patients, this is a totally new journey, new chapter in their lives, and they need some assurance of every person they come in contact with. So I definitely try my hardest to let them know that I understand. I'm here, and let me take your hand, take my hand, and let's walk together. And those are the ways that I find more successful and easier for all the patients that come through. They just need someone to take a little time, making sure they make making the right decision. They're so nervous about research or new treatment options or anything new, wanting this to be the new thing in the last. They're just taking a minute and having that breather with them, and communicating has always kind of worked for me.
And I just want to point out how special it is to see all of these shining Black and brown faces who, as you can imagine, going through the healthcare field and navigating, whether it's a leukemia diagnosis or hypertension, and having the door open and Jocelyn come in or Anna come in, Dr. Hill, Dr. Miller Chisholm. And I'll say that Dr. Hill and I work very closely with Jocelyn, and to have Jocelyn as the coordinator and then to have patients encounter an African-American doctor like myself or Dr. Hill has been a quite special experience. And I will just reiterate what Dr. Pandit said about the pipeline and ensuring that we have diverse research teams, whether it be the doctor, the study coordinator, the social worker, the tissue bank administrator. We have to ensure that we have people that look like the population that we're serving.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. I think it would definitely help to be able to hear and see this information from people who look like us. Courtney, What's your favorite thing about being a research investigator?
I would say that it's really beautiful when, in addition to encountering patients and taking care of patients, that we're able to learn new information. I think in the world of medicine, the knowledge is growing, and it's growing exponentially, in fact. And so when you have that opportunity to be involved in acquiring knowledge from these patients, I think that's very gratifying. I would say in general for me, one of the reasons for even wanting to go into medicine was really all about caring for the patient. And even with my role, I'm not really a primary principal investigator of a trial. Like, I help with them. I don't really design the trial. So I'm just someone who would kind of have more of a secondary role in helping with enrollments in clinical trials. But it's a beautiful thing to be able to just take care of patients, and to take care of patients in the setting of research, where not only you're caring for the patients and their medical problems, but truly learning from them as well. Obviously, we have the books that we learn from, but the way that we get the knowledge in the books is from the patients. And so to be in that process is very rewarding. And as everyone has said to you, Dominique, we're so grateful for you and what you have contributed to how you have contributed to our science and our growth of knowledge.
Courtney, I think absolutely the boots on the ground, like, I think that you guys are the most important ones connecting, because those of us in academia, we write and we have theories about these things, but y'all's role in the real world, actually enrolling and treating the patients, is super, super important. I feel like I need another hour to get all my questions out. So we just have to talk about how to continue to have this dialogue. I have one last question, and I'm going to have to turn
Can
it
I
over.
piggyback on that one, just say one thing? And again, I think Dominique is sort of like a poster child of why we do this, why we participate in clinical trials and run trials, and we always want to have these success stories. But a lot of the patients that Dr. Rouse and I treat, they have a different form of lymphoblastic leukemia that is a T-cell driven leukemia, and the prognosis is very, very poor. And so even the patients who are on our trials that we unfortunately can't cure or don't help in the way that we think, they're also so appreciative and really grateful and thankful because of the core of how our team operates and the care that we provide for them. Even if it's just for a short 6 weeks on our study, you would think they knew us for 6 years, 10 years. And patients really appreciate that and are grateful to have even been able to participate. And we're grateful because we learn from the patients who don't respond as well. So, we love these home run stories, but oftentimes for us in the oncology field, that's not always the case, but we still learn something from every patient that we treat on study.
Thank you.
And develop amazing relationships with
that's
patients and
super
families.
important to know that even if it's not it doesn't end up with a pretty bow on it, that there's still a lot of benefit to get from that. My last question is for you, Rain.
Okay. Right before, let me say one last thing because it's so important. I think Dr. Miller Chisholm pointed out something that's so important. A lot of times patients feel like if they're enrolling on a study, let's say you were receiving your care at Methodist or St. Luke's, and then you went to MD Anderson and you have a new study team, you're not required to sever all ties with your physician, nurse, and trusted team that you had at your home institution. And they are often the most important. So I encourage all of my patients, and I encourage you to be empowered, that if you come to see me, and I'm talking to you specifically about a team, I want to engage your primary care physician. I want to engage the team that was taking care of you before. And they often are there to really kind of have an unbiased relationship and ability to continue to provide care. So that's one of the biggest things is we often, Dr. Hill and I, we borrow people from their trusted healthcare team, but we make sure they understand we're borrowing you and we're added to your team, but we're not taking you away. And we certainly want to keep your healthcare providers engaged, and we trust that you trust them, and will often seek out their expertise as well.
Awesome. That is very important to keep in mind, so that people don't feel like they're giving up one for the other. So that being able to work together. My very last question for you, Dr. Rouse, is I'm not sick. I don't have anything like this sounds interesting. I want to contribute to science. I want to, contribute to the information that's out there used for minority health, but I'm not sick. I don't have anything. Is there any way that I can still participate in some of these things?
Absolutely, especially when you're here in Houston. So one thing that is super simple is you could go to Google and type in clinical research for healthy volunteers in Houston, and you will get a long list. And it often will link you to studies that are going on at Harris Health, or even studies that are going on at Baylor, studies that are going on at Methodist. And these are often studies where you either may be a control group. So if there's a population that has diabetes, you may be the control group. They often are studies that are looking at the safety of a certain device. These are typically studies that you will receive some sort of compensation for. And that's why we kept talking about college students, because on college campuses, you'll see these flyers for these kind of short duration studies that you'll receive compensation for. To be very clear, these same studies are also reviewed by the IRB, often even more rigorously, because when you're dealing with healthy participants, and there's not any specific benefit to them, you have to absolutely ensure that the risks do not outweigh, and that the data and the science is there. So you can absolutely help. You can type it into your Google, and you'll almost be overwhelmed by the number of things. And one thing, if that's too overwhelming, you can Google Baylor College of Medicine or TSU. You can pick an institution and Google what they have going on there.
And Dr. Ndefo, may I also add another way, if you'd like to get involved, and you can Google community scientist. And that gives you an opportunity, it gives lay people an opportunity to go out in your community as, lay health leaders in your community, and educate others in the community, not just about clinical trials, but about vaccines, misinformation, distrust. So that's another way to get involved if you would like.
Awesome. All right. So everybody, wherever you are, please join me in thanking all of our panelists. We still have so many questions, so we're doing this again. We're doing this more often so that we can continue to have this dialogue. Thank you so much for giving us your time today to be able to do this. Because I'm corny like that, I'm taking a picture of the screen because there's so much girl power going on here, and I'm just so excited. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to the TSU Jazz Group, who is going to give us a brief performance. Thanks again, everyone, and I look forward to doing this again in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you all so much. That was fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Ndefo, and the panel as well. I mean, I feel empowered, that's for sure. So now we're going to actually move to our performance by Mr. Jordan Simpson. He is an award-winning performance poet, musician, activist, and TED presenter. Jordan Simpson has appeared in the Huffington Post, the Houston Chronicle, and on National Public Radio while hosting workshops at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts on Climate Change, poverty, and economic justice and social reform. A PharmD candidate at Texas Southern University, Jordan Simpson reserves the belief that we all have the capacity for great impact in our community. So, Mr. Simpson, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Simpson, and I am honored to be able to share with you all today. To the organizers and all others that came together to make this possible, thank you. A friend and I share a similar diagnosis. Somehow, a kinship was forged from bearing the weight of prognosis and patience, all while being patients. But the difference that strikes me lucky forces his hand by chance. An autoimmune disease rendered my friend both blind and paralyzed. And I stand vantage point across the country, but only an ER visit and defense system dysfunction away from the same fate. And this can be where the story ends, but it doesn't. There's a chance. There's always a chance, he tells me. He tells me he enrolled in a clinical trial that moved him to Ohio. There, he volunteered for a new therapy for our condition. And after weeks, he shows me videos of him both walking and seeing again, and I've never been so close to a biblical miracle. He tells me faith in a better tomorrow was the only fight he had in him after all therapy options were exhausted. He continues, if you don't try, you'll never know, he says. He says he was hesitant until he was informed. Scared until he saw there was a team there to ensure his safety, and I wonder, am I a trial away from a miracle myself? He informs me that there is good news for those like us, those who straddle the line of cutting-edge medicine, that we are no longer bearing the burden of our disease, but are labeled the newborns of a success story, the fighters, the frontliners, the evidence of faith, and the carriers of courage. And I encourage you now, promise holders, to participate in being part of the good news. Put yourself in the running for change. Help change the stereotypes of statistics that they are never in our favor. Be very well the thread of the safety net for yourself or for others. Like my friend said, there's a chance. There's always a chance. So take it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so very much, all the panelists team. I mean, this has been incredible. I am literally trying to hold myself back from being overly emotional right now with everything that has been said today. And it's all just very inspiring, from the beginning of the talk, when we started with ethics to phases of clinical trials, to bringing in perception for enrolling children, COVID trials, why should I participate in clinical trials? And listening to the panel session, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. This is amazing. And even for Mr. Jordan sharing his own, perception on his participation in clinical research, I think it's definitely truly inspiring. And I really hope that to everyone in the audience, that you all have been able to learn a lot from today's presentation. And that will then take me to the question that I think it's very important, for us to share before we leave, this moment. Can everyone see my screen? Excuse me. So the question here is, what's next, right? We've had this incredible discussion today, And for us as the community engagement core, we really want to see people make a decision for a change. We want to see people make a decision that would help us move the needle in the right direction, make a decision that would help us continue to advocate and participate in things that would help close the gap to health disparity. So that's why then I'm saying that for us to be able to see the much needed positive change in health disparity, honestly, it takes each and every one of us. A lot has been said, from multiple perspectives, so many things said, over and over again, but it takes each and every one of us to make that decision, to participate, to make that decision to be the change, to make that decision to ask the right question, to engage with this level of information. So what we are saying from the Community Engagement Core this afternoon is that we need to be that change, and that we need to be that advocate. And most importantly, we need to be that hero that would help this generation and the upcoming generation to close that gap in health disparity. We don't want to see the data in clinical trials and see that ethnic minorities are not represented when we know that these disease states, critically impact ethnic minorities. So truly so, it takes each and every one of us to make the decision to participate, to engage, and to do something that will make a difference, to move the needle forward, to help in closing this gap. So thank you so much, everyone. Please don't leave. We still have a couple of very important information to share. Up next, we will bring up Dr. Loud, as she will talk to us briefly about the website of our Community Engagement Core, as well as some of the clinical resources that we have, because there's always a question as to, okay, how do I navigate the system? And again, we are here as a team to help provide answers to some of those critical questions. Dr. Loud, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajawali. So first of all, this is our the CEC website. We want it to be your new premier destination for all matters related to your health, because we are especially curating this specifically for your health. On our website, and I believe we have a link below, but our recently launched website, not only will you find information about ongoing events, contact information for services or some of our community partners, but also a dedicated community resource guide, which is what's featured here, covering the greater Houston community, which is all 9 counties. Here is where we are pulling all of the information we receive from our federally qualified health centers, larger health networks, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and putting it right here at the click of a button so that it's easy for you to be able to access. Next slide, please. And so we are also highlighting clinical trials by disease state in the Houston area. You can also find this in our resource guide, focusing on some of the core areas that the CEC is committed to continuing and furthering efforts. Now, even if one of these disease states maybe doesn't necessarily apply to you, our website connects with the clinicaltrials.gov, where you can actually do a search. And I think Dr. Rouse talked a little bit about this in the chat, where you can do a search. You can do a search by disease state, by drug state, or even by location to try to find those clinical trials that are in your area or relevant to you. And don't forget to make sure you enter that filter, recruiting, so that way you know exactly what's open and what's available. And lastly, we would ask that you always, as they've mentioned before, take this information and go to your healthcare provider and have a conversation to get the details so you can be informed about the best decision for your health. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So now that we have learned so much about clinical research and have gained so much knowledge today, we would like to invite you to stay engaged with the Community Engagement Core. Here are some of the things and events that we have happening in the future that we would love for you to join us for. On May 17th, the CEC will be hosting a community health worker CEU training. I will note that this is not only for certified CHWs, but for community members as well. And we will be discussing self-care, which is something that's really important right now in the middle of a pandemic, making sure that we're really taking care of ourselves. So we invite you to join us for that discussion. We will also be hosting our May seminar on May 20th. Talking about preventative measures and hypertension. And this will also be a virtual seminar. We invite you to join us. Next, we will also be hosting a focus group, which is a part of our community-based participatory research. And the next focus group will be focused solely on prostate cancer. So we are looking for anyone who is currently living with prostate cancer, caretakers for someone who is living with prostate cancer. We'd love to hear from you and learn about your experiences. This will take place on Saturday, May 22nd at 10 a.m. It will also be virtual on Zoom. And if you would like to participate or have suggestions for someone who would like to participate and you want to share this with them, you can contact Dr. Asada Richards, and her contact information is here, 281-667-4466, or you can email at asada@sankofaresearchinstitute.org. Also, this has been put throughout the presentation, but if you are interested in subscribing to the CEC, please text TSU CEC to 855-264-9031 to be a part of our mailing list. Lastly, we've talked about this throughout the presentation and the conference as well. Please make sure you submit the survey. We'd love your feedback. We want to know how we can do better in the future. We want to know what your thoughts are about today. And the link is in the chat. So please feel free and you're welcome to complete the survey there. Again, you will have the opportunity to receive a $15 electronic gift card if you're eligible to do so. So you will see that at the end of your survey, and we welcome you to do that. Lastly, we invite you to stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, which we are actually live streaming the entire conference on Facebook right now. So if you know someone who may have benefited from the information today or may have found this interesting, please go to our Facebook page at CEC Texas Southern U, and you can share this live conference with them. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, where we post all of our seminars on YouTube to be able to view afterwards. And we are newly on LinkedIn as well. So if you frequent LinkedIn, please join us there to stay connected. If you posted anything today or will post afterwards, please hashtag CBMHR or hashtag CREC 2021. We'd love to see your posts and what your thoughts were about today.
Okay, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Juzia. Before we say our final see you later byes to everyone, we do have an incredible presentation again from TSU Jazz Group. Juzia, if you could please scroll up to that page. TSU Jazz Group, because of COVID, we would have loved to kind of have them all together, but they were very creative in putting together, different type of presentations for us, and we really appreciate them in doing that. So TSU Jazz Ensemble is an award-winning ensemble and was commissioned as an official jazz band for the state of Texas. The ensemble has been a feature ensemble at the Jazz Education National Conference, Texas Music Educators Association Conference, the Essentially Ellington Regional Festival, alongside many public concerts and private events. The TSU Jazz Ensemble has a rich history of many notable performers. Some of the well-known artists that has passed through its rank include Kirk Whalum, Frank Lacey, Andre Howard, Barry Lee Hall, and Shelley Carroll, to name a few. Some of their recent graduates include rising stars within the industry, including Melvin Johnson, Raul Blanco, Eddie Moore, Timothy Lee, and many others. The TSU Jazz Ensemble are renowned for their hard-hitting sound, with both feet firmly planted in tradition and its eyes fixed on the future. So to our amazing audience, please stay with us as we enjoy this beautiful performance from the TSU Jazz Group. Wow, I don't know if you all at home or different places where you are, if you feel the energy, if you feel the enthusiasm, if you feel the drive like I do, like I am all very excited. It's been an incredible 3 hours of, information, great, impactful message, and obviously things that would make us think differently, act differently, so that we can be that hero, we can be the advocate, and we can be the change that is much needed in closing the gap in health disparity. I would like to say a big thank you. Without you all amazing audience, we would not be here, right? We could have these events, and if none of you are attending, turning in, logging into Zoom to join us, this event would not have been successful. So we want to say a very big thank you to each and every one of you. To all our speakers, oh my goodness, and all the panelists, thank you and thank you again. The message, the content, the presentations, the emotions, everything that you shared goes a long way to make a positive impact in what we've been able to achieve in the past 3 hours. We want to say a big thank you for that. And to everyone in community engagement call. Oh my goodness, I can't thank you enough. The past 3 hours was successful because you all gave your very best to it. Big thank you to Dr. Ndefo, Dr. Loud, Jizia, our amazing project coordinator, Dr. Mejia, sitting on the back of the computer, answering all those questions and making sure that all our attendees, they have the correct answer to their questions. We thank you. Dr. Tonisha Taylor and Sierra, oh my goodness, you guys have done an amazing job on social media, Twitter, Instagram, all of that, making sure that we are live and we continue to engage people on social media platforms. We say a big thank you. Dr. Asata Richards, Miss Rosalia, Miss Lena, Dr. Morgan, thank you for your input in planning this event. We are grateful. Dr. Egbejimi, even though she's not officially part of the Community Engagement Corps, she participated. She's here with us today. Some of you might not know, several of us are actually physically on TSU campus just to make sure that the event runs smoothly. And Dr. Egbejimi helped us to keep the time, and we really appreciate you for doing that, as well as Mr. Tolu and Mr. Collins, both of which are PhD students with Dr. Olalei. We want to say a big thank you for your help and for your support. Obviously, without the PIs for these grants, we would not have received the fund. Everybody contributed. So I want to say a big thank you to the leadership of the Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research, Dr. Olalei, Dr. J, and Dr. Liang. Thank you for your support. Thank you for believing in us and for giving us the resources needed to be able to put all of this together. To the administration and leadership of our own College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences and our very own TSU, Texas Southern University, we say a big thank you. The leadership and administration has given us all the support that we need, and it is showing in the success of today's event. Again, we say a big thank you to everyone that has joined us. Please, the links are going to be posted again. Complete the survey, follow us on all social media handles. We do have a lot of incredible opportunities, a lot of ways to continue to share information that would help move the needle in the right direction to close the gap on health disparities. That's all we have. It's been an amazing 3 hours and 10 minutes, and we hope to see the effect of this conference, ripple down effect in the decisions that each and every one of us will make in the future. If you missed any parts of this, keep in mind the videos will be posted on YouTube, so feel free to share with loved ones, families, and friends, and stay engaged with us. Thank you. Just before we go, I would like to play the song Better, just showing that the future, what lies ahead of us is better. We see hope, we see clarity, and we see togetherness in the future that lies ahead. Thank you very much.